The wagon didn't slow down. It didn't stop. The woman who had promised to care for her simply looked away. And 10-year-old Lena Crow watched the only home she'd ever known disappear into the dust, leaving her standing alone on a forest trail with nothing but crumbs in her trembling hand. She was abandoned, forgotten, worthless, or so they thought. But fate had other plans. The wealthiest cowboy in 3 counties was about to ride down that very trail, and what happened next would change everything. If you want to see how one little girl's tragedy became the greatest story of redemption the West has ever known, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and let's begin. The morning sun rose blood red over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of warning that no one bothered to heed. It was the summer of 1887, and the land stretched endless and unforgiving beneath a heaven that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Lena Crow sat in the back of the wagon with her knees pulled tight against her chest, making herself as small as possible. She had learned long ago that small things were harder to notice, and things that weren't noticed were less likely to be hurt. The wooden planks beneath her were rough and splintered, but she didn't shift or complain. Complaining was dangerous. Complaining made people remember you existed. The wagon belonged to Martha Greer, a woman with hands like leather and eyes like winter ice. Martha ran a small farm 3 towns back, and she had taken Lena in 8 months ago when the orphanage in Helena had closed its doors for good. Charity case, Martha had called her to the neighbors. Another mouth to feed, but the Lord asks sacrifice of us all. But there had been no charity in Martha's house. There had been work, endless, backbreaking work that started before dawn and ended long after dark. There had been scraps of food eaten standing up in the corner of the kitchen while Martha's own children sat at the table. There had been a bed made of old grain sacks in a corner of the barn, where Lena slept curled up against the cold while rats scratched in the walls around her. And now there was this. The wagon had been moving since before sunrise, heading deeper into the wilderness along a trail Lena didn't recognize. She hadn't asked where they were going. Questions invited anger, and anger invited pain. So she sat in silence, watching the trees grow thicker and the sky grow smaller, and she waited. Martha's husband, Silas, drove the wagon with his shoulders hunched and his eyes fixed straight ahead. He was a thin man with a thin voice, and he never spoke to Lena at all. She might have been invisible to him, a ghost riding in the back of his wagon, and perhaps that was exactly what he wanted her to be. The children, Martha's real children, had stayed behind at the farm. Lena had heard them laughing as the wagon pulled away, their voices bright and careless in the morning air. They had never liked her. She was the girl who did their chores, the girl who took their punishments when things went wrong, the girl whose existence reminded them how lucky they were to have a mother who loved them. The trail narrowed. The trees pressed closer. And still the wagon moved forward, deeper into nowhere. It was nearly noon when Martha finally spoke. "Stop here." Silas pulled the horses to a halt without a word. The wagon creaked and groaned as it settled, and for a long moment there was no sound but the wind moving through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Lena's heart began to beat faster. She didn't know why, but something in the air had changed, something that tasted like danger. Martha climbed down from the wagon's seat, her boots hitting the packed earth with a heavy thud. She walked around to the back where Lena sat, and she stood there for a moment, looking at the girl with an expression that Lena couldn't read. "Get out," Martha said. Lena didn't move. Her body had frozen, locked in place by an instinct older than thought. She had learned to recognize the moments before something bad happened, the way the air seemed to thicken and time seemed to slow, and she recognized that moment now. "I said get out." Martha's voice was harder now, edged with impatience. "Don't make me say it again." Slowly, carefully, Lena uncurled herself and climbed down from the wagon. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she forced them to hold steady. She was wearing the same dress she had worn for the past 3 months, a faded gray thing that had once belonged to Martha's daughter and had been thrown to Lena when it became too stained and torn for anyone else to want. Her feet were bare. She had never been given shoes. Martha reached into the wagon and pulled out a small bundle. a handkerchief tied around something that crinkled like paper. She thrust it toward Lena, and Lena took it automatically, her fingers closing around the rough fabric. "There's bread in there," Martha said, "and some cheese. It should last you a day or two if you're careful." Lena stared at the bundle in her hands. Her mind was working slowly, putting together pieces that didn't want to fit. Bread, cheese, a day or two. "I don't understand," she whispered. Martha's face didn't change. "What's there to understand? You're staying here." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on a root, and she barely kept herself from falling. Staying here? But there's nothing here. There's no house. There's no—" "I know what there is and isn't," Martha cut her off. "Don't you think I know? This is where you belong now. This is where you stay." "But why?" The word tore itself from Lena's throat before she could stop it. "What did I do? I did everything you asked. I worked every day. I never complained. You never stopped being a burden," Martha said coldly. "You think food grows from nothing? You think there's endless room at my table? The crops failed this year. The well's running dry. I've got 3 children of my own to feed, and I can't afford to keep carrying dead weight." Dead weight. The words burned in Lena's chest like hot coals. She had worked harder than anyone. She had done everything, been everything they wanted her to be. And still it wasn't enough. Still, she was nothing. "Please," Lena heard herself say. The word came out thin and broken, the plea of a child who already knew she was begging for nothing. "Please, I'll work harder. I'll eat less. I won't be any trouble. I promise. Just please don't—" "Enough." Martha turned away, dismissing Lena's words like she was swatting at a fly. "This is done. I've made my decision. You'll be fine out here. Someone will come along eventually. Someone always does." She climbed back onto the wagon seat beside Silas, who still hadn't turned around, still hadn't looked at the girl they were abandoning in the middle of nowhere. Martha picked up the reins and clicked her tongue, and the horses began to move. Lena stood frozen in the middle of the trail, watching the wagon pull away. The bundle of food hung limp in her hands. The dust rose around her ankles like a shroud. She should run after them. She should scream, cry, throw herself at the wagon wheels, and beg them to stop. That's what a child was supposed to do when they were being abandoned. That's what the moment called for. But Lena didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. Because experience had taught her something that no child should ever have to learn. Begging only deepens the hurt. Running after people who don't want you only makes the leaving worse. The people who abandon you don't look back, and if you force them to, they will only hate you for it. So she stood there in silence, her bare feet planted in the dirt, and she watched the wagon until it disappeared around a bend in the trail and the sound of the wheels faded into nothing. And then she was alone. The forest pressed in around her like a living thing, vast and indifferent and full of shadows. The trail stretched ahead and behind, a thin line carved through the wilderness, leading nowhere she wanted to go. The sun hung directly overhead, but its warmth couldn't reach the cold place that had opened up inside her chest. Lena looked down at the bundle in her hands. Bread and cheese, a day or two of survival, Martha had said, as if that made what she had done acceptable. As if a handful of food could balance out leaving a child alone in the wilderness to die. Because that's what this was. Lena understood that now, with a clarity that cut through the shock and the hurt and the hollow ache of abandonment. Martha hadn't left her here to be found. Martha had left her here to disappear. Out of sight, out of mind, out of the way. One less mouth to feed, one less burden to carry. Dead weight. Lena's hands tightened on the bundle until her knuckles went white. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to throw the food into the trees and rage at the unfairness of a world that had never once been kind to her. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, held it until her lungs burned, and then let it out slowly. There was no point in anger. There was no point in grief. Both were luxuries that belonged to people who had something left to lose. She had nothing. She was nothing. And somehow, she had to find a way to survive. The first thing was water. Lena knew that much from the fragments of wisdom she had gathered over the years, pieced together from overheard conversations and half-remembered lessons. A person could live for weeks without food, but only days without water. If she was going to make it through this, whatever this turned out to be, she needed to find something to drink. She tilted her head, listening. The forest was full of sounds, birds calling, branches creaking, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. And beneath it all, so faint she almost missed it, the distant murmur of running water. Lena started walking. The trail was easier to follow than the forest floor, so she stayed on it, moving in the direction of the sound. Her bare feet had long since grown tough from months of going without shoes, but the stones and roots still bit into her soles, and she had to pick her path carefully to avoid the worst of them. As she walked, she thought about how she had come to this moment. It was a familiar exercise, a way of reminding herself that her current situation was not unique, that she had survived being unwanted before and could survive it again. She had been born in a mining town called Copper Ridge, or so she'd been told. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father, a miner named Thomas Crow, had tried his best for 6 years before a tunnel collapse had taken him too. After that, there had been the orphanage in Helena, a grim building full of grim children overseen by grim women who saw their charges as a duty rather than a calling. She had stayed there for 3 years, watching other children get adopted while she remained behind. She was too quiet, the matron said. Too strange. Too difficult to place. Families wanted cheerful children, easy children, children who smiled and laughed and didn't look at them with eyes too old for their faces. When the orphanage closed, lack of funding, lack of interest, lack of anyone who cared, the remaining children had been farmed out to whoever would take them. Some went to families who wanted helpers. Some went to businesses looking for cheap labor. And Lena had gone to Martha Greer, who had taken her for the work she could do and discarded her the moment that work was no longer worth the cost. It was a familiar story. It was her story. And now, apparently, her story was ending on a nameless trail in the middle of nowhere, alone and abandoned and forgotten, unless she refused to let it end. The sound of water grew louder as she walked, and soon she could see it, a small creek cutting through the forest, its surface glittering in the patches of sunlight that filtered through the trees. Lena hurried toward it, her throat suddenly aching with thirst, and she dropped to her knees beside the bank. The water was cold and clear, and she drank deeply, cupping it in her hands and bringing it to her mouth again and again until her stomach sloshed and her thirst finally began to ease. Then she sat back on her heels and looked around, taking stock of her situation. She was alone. She was lost. She had no shelter, no weapons, no way to protect herself from the predators that surely roamed these woods. She had a handful of food that would last a day or two at most, and after that, she would have to find a way to feed herself or starve. The odds were not in her favor. A more experienced person might have despaired. A younger child might have broken down entirely, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she faced. But Lena Crow was neither experienced nor young. She was somewhere in between, caught in the narrow space where survival instinct met stubborn determination, and she had decided somewhere in the past hour that she was not going to die on this trail. Not today. Not like this. Not alone and forgotten and unmourned. She would survive. She didn't know how yet, but she would figure it out. She had always figured it out before. The afternoon passed slowly. Lena stayed near the creek, reasoning that water was the most valuable resource she had found, and that straying too far from it would be foolish. She explored the immediate area carefully, looking for anything that might be useful. Plants she recognized from Martha's garden, rocks sharp enough to serve as tools, places where the brush was thick enough to provide shelter. She found a small hollow beneath an overhang of rock, barely large enough for her to squeeze into, but protected from the wind and hidden from casual view. It wasn't much, but it was something. A place to sleep, a place to hide, a place that was hers alone. She gathered leaves and pine needles and piled them inside the hollow, creating a rough bed that was better than the grain sacks she had slept on at Martha's farm. She collected stones from the creek and arranged them in a circle, remembering something she had once heard about fire pits. She didn't know how to start a fire, had never been allowed near the matches at the farm, but perhaps she could figure it out. Perhaps there was a way. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Lena sat beside her little camp and opened the bundle Martha had given her. Inside, wrapped in a stained handkerchief, she found a heel of stale bread and a small wedge of cheese that had already begun to sweat in the heat. It wasn't much. It was barely anything at all. But it was more than she'd had on many days at the farm, and she ate it slowly, savoring each bite, making it last. When she was finished, she carefully folded the handkerchief and tucked it into her pocket. It was dirty and worn, but it was hers now, one of the only things in the world that belonged to her alone. The shadows lengthened, the air grew cool, and as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lena crawled into her hollow beneath the rock and curled into a ball, pulling her thin dress tight around her. She was alone. She was afraid. She was a 10-year-old girl who had been thrown away like garbage, left to die in the wilderness by people who had never seen her as human. But she was alive. She had water. She had shelter. She had the stubborn, burning determination to see another sunrise. And somewhere in the darkness, she heard something that made her blood run cold, the distant howl of wolves, rising and falling like a song of hunger. Lena pressed her back against the cold stone and closed her eyes. She didn't pray, had stopped believing in prayers long ago. But she made herself a promise instead, fierce and silent and unbreakable. She would not die here. She would not let them win. She would survive this night and the next after that. And someday, somehow, she would prove to everyone who had ever abandoned her that she was worth more than they could possibly imagine. It was a child's promise, desperate and defiant and probably impossible. But it was all she had left. Morning came slowly, gray and misty and cold. Lena woke to the sound of birds singing and the ache of muscles that had spent the night pressed against hard ground. She was stiff and sore, and her stomach growled with hunger, but she was alive. She had survived her first night alone. She crawled out of her hollow and stretched, wincing at the protest of her body. The world around her was draped in fog, the trees emerging like ghosts from the whiteness, and for a long moment she simply stood there, breathing in the damp air and letting the reality of her situation wash over her again. She was still alone. She was still lost. Nothing had changed, but she was still alive, and that was something. She made her way to the creek and drank deeply, then splashed cold water on her face to chase away the last cobwebs of sleep. She had no food left. The bread and cheese were gone, but she remembered seeing berries growing along the trail yesterday, and she thought she might be able to find more if she looked. The fog began to lift as the sun rose higher, and Lena set out to explore her surroundings more thoroughly. She moved carefully, staying close to the creek so she could find her way back, and she kept her eyes open for anything edible. She found blackberries first, growing in a thick tangle along the water's edge. They were small and tart, not quite ripe, but she ate them anyway, stuffing her mouth full until her fingers were stained purple, and her stomach had stopped cramping with hunger. She found mushrooms too, but she didn't know which ones were safe to eat, so she left them alone. Better to go hungry than to poison herself. The morning passed, the sun climbed higher, and Lena began to accept that this was her life now, this endless search for food and water, this constant vigilance against predators, this lonely existence at the edge of survival. She was walking back toward her camp, her arms full of berries wrapped in the handkerchief, when she heard something that made her freeze in her tracks. Hoofbeats. Someone was coming. Lena's first instinct was to hide. She had learned long ago that strangers were dangerous, that people who came looking for lost children rarely had good intentions. But something made her hesitate. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope, maybe just the desperate loneliness of a child who had been alone for too long. She stepped off the trail and crouched behind a thick bush, peering through the leaves at the path ahead. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, and then a figure emerged from the trees. It was a man on horseback. He was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting straight in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent their whole life on horseback. His clothes were practical but well-made, not the patched and faded garments of a farmer, but the sturdy canvas and leather of a rancher. His face was weathered by sun and wind, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth, and his hair was dark shot through with gray. He rode alone, with no wagon and no companions, and his eyes scanned the trail ahead with a quiet alertness that suggested he missed nothing. Lena held her breath as he approached, willing herself to be invisible. She was just a shadow in the brush, just a trick of the light, just... The horse stopped. The man turned his head slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at the bush where Lena was hiding. "I know you're there," he said. His voice was low and calm, without threat or anger. Saw your tracks in the mud back a ways, small feet, no shoes. You've been out here at least a day, maybe more. Lena didn't move, didn't breathe. I'm not looking for trouble, the man continued. Just passing through. But if you're hurt or hungry, I've got food in my saddlebag. Water too. Silence. The man waited. He didn't push, didn't demand, didn't try to flush her out of her hiding place. He just sat there on his horse, patient as stone, letting the offer hang in the air between them. And slowly, reluctantly, Lena rose from behind the bush. She stepped onto the trail with her chin lifted and her shoulders squared, meeting the stranger's gaze with a defiance she didn't entirely feel. She was filthy and ragged, her dress torn and her feet caked with mud, but she refused to cringe or cower. She had been abandoned, not defeated. The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he nodded. How old are you? He asked. 10. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Almost 11. You alone out here? The question should have been simple, but it carried weight. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been done to her, everything she had lost. Lena felt it pressing down on her chest, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Yes, she finally said. I'm alone. The man didn't ask why. He didn't demand her story or press for details she wasn't ready to give. He just reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a wrapped bundle, and held it out toward her. Biscuits, he said. Made them this morning. They're still warm. Lena stared at the bundle. Her stomach growled so loudly that she was sure he could hear it, but she didn't move to take the food. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. What do you want? She asked. What do you want for them? Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe, or sadness. Nothing, he said. I don't want anything. You're hungry. I have food. That's all. Nobody gives something for nothing. Some people do. He set the bundle on the ground in front of her and pulled back, giving her space. I'll leave them there. You can take them or not. Your choice. Lena looked at the bundle, looked at the man, looked back at the bundle. Her whole life, people had wanted things from her. Work, obedience, silence, invisibility. Every gift had come with strings attached. Every kindness had been a debt to be repaid. She had learned to be suspicious of generosity, to look for the hidden cost in every offered hand. But she was so hungry. And the biscuits smelled so good. Slowly, carefully, she bent down and picked up the bundle. She unwrapped it with trembling fingers and found 3 golden biscuits inside, still faintly warm from the morning's fire. She bit into one, and the taste was so good, butter and salt and simple, honest bread, that her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. The man watched her eat in silence, making no move to come closer, making no demands. When she had finished the first biscuit and started on the second, he spoke again. My name is Marcus Hale, he said. I've got a ranch about half a day's ride north of here. Plenty of room, plenty of food. He paused. You can come with me if you want, or you can stay here. Your choice. Lena stopped chewing. She looked up at him, searching his face for the lie, the trick, the hidden trap. But his expression was calm and open, and his eyes, dark brown, almost black, held nothing but patience. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? Because you need help, he said simply, and because I can give it. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough to explain why a stranger would stop for an abandoned child, offer her food, invite her into his home. But it was more than anyone had ever offered her before. Lena thought about her hollow beneath the rock, thought about the wolves she had heard in the night, thought about the berries that weren't quite ripe, and the mushrooms she didn't dare eat, and the endless empty days stretching out ahead of her with no one to help and nowhere to go. She thought about what it meant to trust someone, and she thought about what it meant to die alone. Okay, she heard herself say. The word came out small and uncertain, barely louder than a whisper. Okay, I'll come with you. Marcus Hale nodded once, as if this was exactly what he had expected. He climbed down from his horse, a big chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead, and stood beside it holding the reins. You can ride in front, he said. It's easier that way. Unless you'd rather walk. Lena shook her head.
Walking meant falling behind, and falling behind meant being left again. She had done enough walking. He helped her up onto the horse, lifting her with an ease that suggested he was stronger than he looked, and then swung up behind her.
The saddle was wide enough for both of them, and Lena found herself surrounded by warmth. The warmth of the horse beneath her, the warmth of the man behind her, the warmth of the sun now fully risen above the trees. "Hold on to the saddle horn," Marcus said. "We'll take it slow." The horse began to move, and Lena felt the trail sliding away beneath her, carrying her away from the place where she had been abandoned and towards something she didn't yet understand. She didn't know what waited for her at Marcus Hale's ranch. She didn't know if she could trust him or if this was just another temporary stop on the long road to nowhere. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something that might have been hope. It was small and fragile and afraid to show itself, like a candle flame in a room full of wind. But it was there. And as the forest opened up before them and the trail widened into something that almost resembled a road, Lena allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to belong somewhere. She didn't know that Marcus Hale was the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. She didn't know that his land stretched for miles in every direction, or that he had built his fortune through decades of hard work and careful planning. She didn't know that he had lost his wife to fever 10 years ago and his only son to a riding accident 5 years after that, or that he had spent the last 5 years alone in a house built for a family he no longer had. She didn't know any of that. All she knew was that he had stopped for her, that he had offered her food without asking for anything in return, that he had given her a choice when everyone else had only ever given her orders. And for now, that was enough. The horse carried them northward, away from the trail where Lena had been left to die, toward a future she couldn't yet see. Behind them, the forest swallowed up her hollow beneath the rock, her pile of leaves and pine needles, the stones she had arranged in a circle for a fire she had never learned to build. Behind them, everything she had been was fading into memory. Ahead of her, something new was waiting. Lena Crow held tight to the saddle horn and watched the world pass by, and she made herself another promise, fierce and silent and unbreakable. Whatever came next, she would face it. Whatever this man wanted from her, she would survive it. And whatever this ranch turned out to be, she would find a way to make it hers. Because she was done being abandoned, done being thrown away, done being dead weight. From now on, she would be something else entirely. She just didn't know what yet. The ranch appeared on the horizon like something out of a dream that Lena had never dared to have. They had been riding for hours, the sun tracking its slow arc across the sky while the forest gave way to rolling grassland, and the grassland gave way to something else entirely. A valley so wide and green that it seemed to stretch all the way to the edge of the world. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the summer heat, and between them and the trail lay more land than Lena had ever seen in one place. And in the center of it all, nestled against a gentle rise of earth, stood the house. It was bigger than anything she had imagined. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon light like eyes watching her approach. Behind it sprawled a barn twice the size of the orphanage in Helena, and beyond that, fences stretched toward the horizon in neat, orderly lines, containing horses that moved like shadows across the grass. "This is yours?" The words came out before Lena could stop them, small and disbelieving. "This is home," Marcus said simply. "Has been for 30 years. Lena stared at the house, at the barn, at the endless sweep of land that surrounded them. She had known he was wealthy, had sensed it in the quality of his clothes, the health of his horse, the quiet confidence in his voice. But she hadn't understood what wealthy meant. Not really. Not until now. The horse carried them down the final stretch of trail and into the yard, where a man emerged from the barn to meet them. He was younger than Marcus, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands, and he looked at Lena with an expression of undisguised surprise. "Boss," he said, taking the horse's reins, "didn't expect you back till tomorrow. And you've brought—" He trailed off, clearly uncertain how to finish the sentence. "Her name is Lena," Marcus said, swinging down from the saddle. He reached up and lifted her down after him, setting her on her feet with the same easy strength he had shown before. "She'll be staying with us for a while. See that a room is made up for her in the main house." The man's eyebrows rose, but he didn't argue. "Yes, sir. I'll tell Rosa." "Do that."
And Tom? Marcus paused, his voice dropping low. She's been through something. I don't know what yet, and I'm not asking, but she's under my protection now. Make sure everyone understands that. Something passed between the two men, an understanding that Lena couldn't quite read but could feel in the air between them. Tom nodded slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to something more thoughtful. Understood, boss. I'll spread the word.
Marcus turned back to Lena, and for the first time she saw something like gentleness in his weathered face. Come on, he said. Let's get you inside. Get some real food in you. Get you cleaned up. He started toward the house, and Lena followed, because what else could she do? She was a stranger in a strange place, surrounded by land she didn't know and people she didn't trust. And the only thing keeping her from running was the simple fact that she had nowhere else to go. The porch steps creaked beneath her bare feet as she climbed them. The front door swung open before Marcus could reach it, and a woman appeared in the doorway, middle-aged, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face that looked like it had seen its share of hard years. "Mr. Hale," she said, and then her eyes fell on Lena and widened. Oh my. Rosa, this is Lena. She needs a bath, a meal, and a bed. Not necessarily in that order." The woman, Rosa, looked from Marcus to Lena and back again. Something unspoken passed between them, and then Rosa's expression softened into something that might have been compassion. "Come here, child," she said, reaching out her hand. "Let's get you sorted out." Lena hesitated. She looked at Marcus, searching his face for some indication of what she should do, but he only nodded. "Go on," he said. "Rosa runs this house. She'll take care of you." It wasn't trust that made Lena take Rosa's hand. It was exhaustion, bone deep and absolute, the kind that came from spending 2 days alone in the wilderness with nothing but fear and determination to keep her alive. She was tired of being strong, tired of being vigilant, tired of carrying the weight of her own survival on shoulders that were never meant to bear it. So she let Rosa lead her into the house, through a hallway that smelled of wood smoke and something savory cooking, up a staircase that seemed to go on forever, and into a room that made her stop dead in her tracks. It was beautiful. A real bed stood against one wall, not a pile of grain sacks or a cot in the corner, but an actual bed with a metal frame and a mattress that looked thick and soft. A window looked out over the valley below, letting in the golden light of late afternoon. There was a dresser with a mirror, a wardrobe for clothes, a braided rug on the floor that was cleaner than anything Lena had ever been allowed to touch. "This is mine?" she whispered. Rosa smiled, and for the first time Lena saw real warmth in another person's eyes. "This is yours, child, for as long as you need it." Lena stood in the doorway, unable to move. She had never had a room before, had never had a space that was hers alone, a door she could close, a place where she could exist without being watched or judged or measured against impossible standards. "I'll draw you a bath," Rosa said gently, "and find you some clean clothes. You look about the same size as—" She paused, and something flickered across her face, a shadow of old grief, quickly hidden. "We'll find something that fits. You rest now. I'll come get you when supper's ready." She left, and Lena was alone. For a long moment, she just stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening. This morning, she had woken up beneath a rock overhang with nothing but a handful of berries and the certainty of her own eventual death. Now she was standing in a room that was nicer than anything she had ever seen, in a house that belonged to a man she had met only hours ago, being offered food and shelter and safety by people who had no reason to care whether she lived or died. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But the bed looked so soft, and she was so tired. Lena crossed the room and sat down on the edge of the mattress, half expecting it to disappear beneath her like a dream. It didn't. It was real, solid and warm and impossibly comfortable, and before she knew what was happening, she was lying down, her head sinking into a pillow that smelled like lavender and clean linen. She meant to stay awake, meant to keep her guard up, stay alert for danger, be ready to run if this turned out to be another trap, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes, Lena Crow was asleep. She dreamed of wolves. They circled her in the darkness, their eyes glowing like embers, their breath hot against her skin. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The wolves drew closer, closer, and she could feel their hunger, ancient and endless and patient, waiting for her to give up, to stop fighting, to become nothing. And then a voice cut through the darkness.
"Wake up." Lena's eyes snapped open. Rosa stood beside the bed, her hand on Lena's shoulder, her face creased with concern. The room was darker now. The golden light of afternoon had faded to the soft gray of twilight, and for a moment Lena didn't know where she was. "Easy, child," Rosa said. "You're safe. It was just a dream." Lena sat up slowly, her heart still racing, her hands trembling. The wolves were gone. The darkness was gone. She was in the beautiful room with the soft bed and the window overlooking the valley, and she was safe. Safe. The word felt foreign in her mind, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. "Supper's ready," Rosa said gently. "Can you walk? Or do you need a minute?" "I can walk." Lena pushed herself to her feet, surprised to find that her legs were steady beneath her. "I'm okay." Rosa looked at her with an expression that suggested she didn't quite believe that, but she didn't argue.
"There's a bath waiting for you down the hall. Clean clothes on the chair, take your time, and come down when you're ready. Mr. Hale doesn't stand on ceremony." The bath was unlike anything Lena had ever experienced. She had bathed before, of course, quick, cold dunks in horse troughs or buckets of rainwater that left her shivering and barely cleaner than before. But this was different. This was a copper tub filled with hot water that steamed in the cool air, scented with something floral that made her head swim. She climbed in carefully, expecting the water to burn, but it was perfect. Warm enough to soothe her aching muscles, hot enough to make her feel clean in a way she hadn't felt in months. She scrubbed away the dirt of the forest, the grime of the trail, the lingering residue of everything Martha Greer had put her through. And when she finally emerged from the tub, she felt like a different person. The clothes Rosa had left for her were simple but well made: a cotton dress in pale blue, a pair of thick socks, and shoes. Real shoes. Lena stared at them for a long moment, remembering all the mornings she had walked barefoot through mud and frost because Martha had never seen fit to give her footwear. She put them on. They fit perfectly. And then she went downstairs to face whatever came next. The dining room was smaller than Lena had expected. Not the grand hall she had imagined, but a cozy space with a wooden table and chairs and a fireplace that crackled with warmth. Marcus sat at the head of the table, and he looked up when she entered. "There you are," he said. "Feeling better?" Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. "Sit down." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Rosa's made enough food to feed an army. Hope you're hungry." She was. She was so hungry that her stomach had stopped growling and settled into a kind of dull, constant ache, the kind that came from going too long without enough. But she sat down carefully, arranging herself in the chair with the precise, deliberate movements of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Marcus noticed. Of course he noticed. Lena was beginning to understand that this man noticed everything. But he didn't comment. He just waited while Rosa brought out platters of food: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and set them on the table between them. "Eat," Marcus said, "as much as you want. There's more where that came from." Lena stared at the food. There was more here than she would have eaten in a week at Martha's farm, more than she had seen in one place since the orphanage closed, more than she had ever dared to hope for. She reached out slowly and took a piece of bread. It was warm, soft, fresh from the oven. She bit into it and something inside her chest cracked open, a wall she hadn't known she was holding up, a defense she hadn't realized she needed. The bread tasted like heaven. It tasted like safety. It tasted like everything she had ever wanted and never been allowed to have. And before she could stop herself, she was crying. The tears came without warning and without permission, sliding down her cheeks and dripping onto the table, and Lena couldn't do anything to stop them. She sat there with the bread in her hand and her shoulders shaking, and she cried like she hadn't cried since her father died, like she hadn't cried in all the years since, because crying was weakness, and weakness was dangerous, and she had never been allowed to be weak. But she couldn't stop. The tears kept coming, wave after wave of grief and relief, and something she couldn't name, and she was sure that Marcus would be angry now, sure that he would tell her to stop, to be quiet, to control herself. "It's all right." His voice was gentle, quieter than she had ever heard it. You're allowed to cry here. You're allowed to feel whatever you need to feel. No one's going to punish you for it." Lena looked up at him through her tears, searching for the lie. But his face was calm and open, and his eyes held nothing but patience. The same patience he had shown on the trail, the same patience that had waited for her to come out of hiding instead of forcing her into the light. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." He pushed a cloth napkin across the table toward her. "When you've been through what you've been through, tears are the least of it. Just let them come. They'll stop when they're ready." She didn't know how he knew what she'd been through. She hadn't told him anything, not about Martha, not about the orphanage, not about the years of being unwanted and unloved and thrown away like garbage. But somehow, he seemed to understand. Maybe it was written on her face. Maybe it was in the way she moved, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the way she sat like she was waiting for a blow that never came. Maybe survival left its marks in ways that only other survivors could read. The tears slowed. Stopped. Lena wiped her face with the napkin and took a shaky breath. "Better?" Marcus asked. She nodded. "Good. Now eat, and don't rush. We've got all the time in the world." They ate in silence for a while, and Lena found herself relaxing despite her best intentions. The food was good, better than anything she had ever tasted, and there was something about Marcus's presence that made her feel less alone. He didn't push, didn't pry, didn't demand explanations or confessions or gratitude. He just sat there, eating his own meal, occasionally glancing out the window at the darkening valley beyond. Finally, when Lena had eaten more than she thought her stomach could hold, Marcus set down his fork and looked at her. "I'm not going to ask what happened to you," he said. "That's your story to tell or not tell, as you choose. But I need you to understand something." Lena tensed, waiting for the condition, the price, the hidden cost of everything she had been given. "You're safe here," Marcus continued. "For as long as you want to stay, this is your home. No one's going to hurt you. No one's going to send you away. And no one," his voice hardened just for a moment, "is going to make you feel like you don't belong." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to so badly that it hurt, a physical ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the food she had eaten. But she had believed people before. She had trusted before. And every time, without fail, they had let her down. "Why?" she asked. The same question she had asked on the trail, and still the one she couldn't answer. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He stared out the window, and Lena saw something shift in his expression, a shadow of old pain, quickly hidden. "I had a daughter," he said finally. "Not by blood. She came to us the way you came to me. Showed up at the ranch one day, half-starved and running from something she never talked about. My wife, Catherine, she saw something in her. Took her in. Raised her like our own." He paused, and Lena waited, not daring to breathe. "She died. Fever took her, same fever that took Catherine 10 years ago. She was 16 years old, and she was the brightest thing this ranch had ever seen." He turned back to Lena, and his eyes were distant now, looking at something she couldn't see. "I couldn't save her, couldn't save either of them. But maybe—" He shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe this is how I make it right. Maybe this is how I prove that all that loss meant something." It wasn't the answer Lena had expected. She had braced herself for conditions, for demands, for the inevitable strings attached to every gift she had ever been given. But this was something else entirely. This was grief. This was love. This was a man who had lost everything and was trying to find a way to live with it. "I'm not her," Lena said quietly. "I'm not your daughter. I'm nobody." "You're wrong." Marcus's voice was firm. "You're not nobody. You're a child who deserves a chance, and as long as you're under this roof, that's exactly what you're going to get." The days that followed blurred together like watercolors in the rain. Lena woke each morning in her soft bed, still half expecting to find herself back beneath the rock overhang with the wolves howling in the distance. But each morning, the room was the same. The sunlight streaming through the window, the smell of breakfast drifting up from downstairs, the quiet certainty that she was somewhere safe. It took time to believe it. Marcus didn't push her. He didn't make demands or set conditions or tell her what she was supposed to do. Instead, he gave her something she had never experienced before: space. The ranch has rules, he told her on that first morning. But they're not my rules. They're the land's rules. The horses need to be fed. The fences need to be mended. The cattle need to be moved before the summer heat sets in. Everyone here has a job to do, and everyone's work matters. He paused, watching her face. But you're not ready for that yet. Right now, your only job is to heal, to eat, to sleep, to remember what it feels like to be a child. She didn't know what he meant by that. She had never felt like a child, not really, not even when she was small enough to fit in her father's arms. She had always been working, always been surviving, always been carrying weights that no child should have to carry, but she didn't argue. And slowly, tentatively, she began to explore. The ranch was bigger than she had imagined, thousands of acres of grassland and forest and mountain, crisscrossed with trails that seemed to go on forever. She walked for hours those first few days, following the fence lines, watching the horses, sitting by the creek that ran through the property, and listening to the water sing over the stones. No one stopped her. No one asked where she was going or what she was doing. No one watched her with suspicious eyes or counted the minutes she spent away from her chores. It was freedom, real freedom. And Lena didn't know what to do with it. Rosa was kind to her. The older woman seemed to understand without being told that Lena was fragile in ways that didn't show on the surface. She didn't ask questions about where Lena had come from or what had happened to her. She simply fed her, clothed her, and made sure she had everything she needed. "You remind me of someone," Rosa said one afternoon as Lena helped her shell peas in the kitchen. It was the first time Lena had offered to help with anything, and Rosa had accepted without comment, simply handing her a bowl and showing her what to do. "Who?" Lena asked. "Someone I knew a long time ago." Rosa's hands moved with practiced ease, splitting the pods and tumbling the peas into a waiting bowl. A girl who came to this ranch with nothing but the clothes on her back and more hurt in her eyes than anyone should have to carry. Lena's hands stilled. What happened to her? She healed. Rosa smiled, soft and sad. It took time, more time than anyone expected, but she healed, and when she left this ranch, she was whole again. She left? Everyone leaves eventually. That's the way of things. Rosa looked at her, and her eyes were gentle. But that doesn't mean the leaving has to hurt. Sometimes leaving is just the next part of the story. Lena thought about that for a long time afterward. She thought about all the leaving she had done, the leaving that had been forced on her, the leaving that had felt like dying. She wondered if there was another kind of leaving, one that didn't break you into pieces. She didn't know. But she was starting to think she might want to find out. A week passed. Then 2. The summer heat settled over the valley like a blanket, and Lena found herself falling into something like a routine. She woke early, before the sun was fully up, and went to the kitchen to help Rosa with breakfast. She had discovered that she liked cooking, liked the rhythm of it, the way ingredients came together to become something nourishing and real. Rosa was a patient teacher, showing her how to knead bread and crack eggs and season a pot of stew until it tasted like home. After breakfast, she walked. Sometimes she followed the fence lines, checking for breaks that the ranch hands might have missed. Sometimes she went to the barn and watched the horses, learning their names and their personalities, and the way they moved when they were happy or scared or tired. Sometimes she just sat by the creek and let her mind go blank, listening to the water and feeling the sun on her face, and trying to remember that she was allowed to exist without justifying her existence. And sometimes, more often as the days went by, she spent time with Marcus. He was a quiet man, the kind who could sit for hours without speaking and not feel the need to fill the silence. But when he did speak, his words carried weight. He told her about the ranch, how he had built it from nothing, how he had fought for every acre, how he had buried his wife beneath the old oak tree on the hill and his daughter beside her. "Loss is part of life," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "You can't escape it, can't outrun it, can only learn to carry it." Lena pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "How do you carry it?" "Same way you carry anything heavy, one step at a time." He looked at her, and his eyes were kind. "You've been carrying a lot, haven't you?" She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. "I know what it's like," he continued, "to feel like the world doesn't want you,
Like you're just taking up space, using up air, existing when you shouldn't be. I know what it's like to wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. Lena's breath caught in her throat.
She had never said those words out loud, had barely allowed herself to think them, but hearing them from someone else, spoken so matter-of-factly, made them feel less like a shameful secret and more like a truth she was finally allowed to acknowledge. But here's the thing, Marcus said. Those feelings are liars. They tell you you're worthless, but they're wrong. They tell you no one cares, but they're wrong about that too. You matter. You matter because you're alive, and being alive is enough. Is it? The words came out before she could stop them. Is it really enough? It's a start. He turned back to the sunset, and his voice was soft. Give it time. The rest will follow. 3 weeks into her stay at the ranch, Lena met the horses. Not just saw them from a distance, the way she had been doing, but really met them, up close, with Marcus beside her and a lead rope in her hand. "This is Bella," Marcus said, introducing her to a bay mare with soft eyes and a gentle temperament. "She's been on this ranch longer than most of the people. Raised her from a foal." Lena reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering just above the mare's nose. Bella snorted softly and pushed her muzzle into Lena's palm, her whiskers tickling the sensitive skin. "She likes you," Marcus observed. "How can you tell?" "She's not trying to bite you." A rare smile crossed his face. That's Bella's version of approval. Over the following days, Lena learned to care for the horses. She learned how to brush their coats and check their hooves and measure out their feed. She learned to read their body language, the flick of an ear that meant attention, the swish of a tail that meant annoyance, the soft nicker that meant trust. And slowly, she learned to ride. "Keep your heels down," Marcus instructed, walking beside her as Bella plodded around the corral. "Relax your shoulders. You're stiff as a fence post. I'm trying not to fall off." "You won't fall off. Bella wouldn't let you." He reached up and adjusted her grip on the reins. "Trust her. She knows what she's doing, even if you don't." Trust. That word again. It kept coming up over and over like a lesson she was supposed to be learning. Lena tried. She loosened her death grip on the saddle horn. She let her shoulders drop. She took a deep breath and allowed her body to move with Bella's rhythm instead of fighting against it. And something shifted. The fear didn't disappear. It never completely disappeared. But it faded into the background, replaced by something else. Exhilaration, maybe. Or freedom. The wind in her hair, the horse beneath her, the endless sky above. It felt like flying without leaving the ground. "There you go," Marcus said, and there was approval in his voice. "You're a natural." She wasn't a natural. She knew that. She was a girl who had spent her whole life being told she wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of the air she breathed. But hearing those words spoken so casually, so sincerely, made her want to believe them. Maybe she could be a natural. Maybe she could be good at something. Maybe all those people who had told her she was nothing had been wrong. It was a dangerous thought. Hope always was. But Lena held on to it anyway. 1 month after Marcus found her on that forest trail, Lena finally told him her story. They were sitting on the porch again, watching the stars come out one by one. The night was warm, and the valley was quiet, and something about the darkness made it easier to speak. "Her name was Martha," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Martha Greer. She took me in after the orphanage closed." Marcus didn't respond. He just listened, his presence steady and solid beside her. "She needed help on the farm. That's why she took me. Not because she wanted a daughter or because she cared about me, just because I was young and strong enough to work." Lena's hands twisted in her lap. "I did everything she asked. Everything. I worked harder than anyone, ate less than anyone, never complained, never asked for anything. I thought if I was good enough, if I was useful enough, maybe she would—" She trailed off. The sentence didn't need to be finished. "This summer, the crops failed," she continued. "The well started running dry. Money got tight, and Martha decided she couldn't afford to keep feeding me anymore. So she took me out to the forest and left me there. Just left me. Like I was nothing, like I was garbage she couldn't be bothered to dispose of properly." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't cry. She had cried enough. Tonight she just wanted to get the words out. "I waited," she said. I waited for her to come back. I knew she wouldn't. I knew, but I waited anyway. Because that's what you do when you're nothing. You wait for someone to decide you're worth something after all. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything Lena had said and everything she hadn't. Finally, Marcus spoke. You're not nothing. His voice was rough, like the words were hard for him to say. You hear me? You're not garbage. You're not disposable. You're not dead weight or a burden or any of the other lies they told you. Lena shook her head. You don't understand. I've been abandoned before. This wasn't the first time. It won't be the last. People look at me and they see something wrong, something broken, something not worth keeping. Then they're blind. Marcus turned to face her, and his eyes were fierce in the starlight. I've seen a lot of people in my life, Lena. Good people and bad people and everything in between. And I've never met anyone who wasn't worth something. Not one single person.
What about the bad ones? The ones who hurt people? Even them. They made choices, wrong choices. But they started out the same as everyone else. Just people, doing their best with what they had. He paused. The difference is in what you do with your pain. Some people let it make them cruel. Some people let it make them stronger. Lena looked down at her hands. They were rough now, calloused from weeks of work, but they were steady, stable, capable. Which one am I? She asked quietly. That's up to you. Marcus's voice softened. But I know which one I think you are. She didn't ask him to elaborate. She didn't need to. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Lena Crow felt like she might actually be worth something after all. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, and the valley transformed around her. The green grass turning gold, the leaves on the mountain slopes erupting into flames of red and orange and yellow. The air grew crisp, and the mornings came later, and the ranch settled into the rhythm of the changing season. And Lena changed with it. She grew stronger. The food and rest and safety had done what years of deprivation had failed to accomplish. She put on weight, built muscle, lost the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes since the day her father died. Her hair grew longer and shinier, her skin cleared up. She looked for the first time in her life like a healthy child. But the changes weren't just physical. She learned things at the ranch. Not just practical skills, though she learned plenty of those, but deeper things. Things about trust and hope and the slow, painful process of letting people in. She learned that Marcus Hale was a man of his word. When he said she was safe, he meant it. When he said she belonged, he believed it. He never raised a hand to her, never raised his voice, never made her feel small or unwanted or afraid. She learned that Rosa was more than just the housekeeper. She was the heart of the ranch, the one who remembered everyone's birthday and made sure there were flowers on the table and knew exactly when someone needed a kind word or a firm push. She had lost her own family years ago, a husband to the war, children to disease, and the ranch had become her home, her purpose, her reason to keep going. She learned that the ranch hands were good men, rough around the edges but decent at their core. They taught her how to rope and brand and ride, and they never once made her feel like she didn't belong. She was Mr. Hale's girl, they said, and that was enough for them. And slowly, hesitantly, Lena learned to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth caring about. It was Marcus who first suggested she choose a new name. They were in the barn, mucking out stalls, when he brought it up. Lena had taken to helping with the morning chores, finding comfort in the routine and the physical labor. There was something satisfying about work that had nothing to do with survival. Work that was just work, honest and simple and real. Crow, Marcus said, leaning on his pitchfork. That's the name they gave you at the orphanage? Lena nodded. I don't remember my mother's name. My father was Thomas, but I don't know if Crow was his real name or just something they put on a piece of paper. Do you like it? The name? She had never thought about it before. The name had simply been hers, a label attached to her without her input or consent. But now that Marcus asked, she realized that she had never felt any connection to it. Crow. It sounded dark, harsh, like something you'd call a bird that fed on carrion. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never thought about it. Well, think about it now. Marcus resumed his shoveling. A name is important. It's how the world sees you.
And more than that, it's how you see yourself. What would I choose instead? Whatever feels right. He glanced at her, and there was something warm in his eyes. You've got time. No rush. Lena thought about it for days. She tried on different names in her mind, testing them like shoes that might or might not fit. But nothing felt right. Nothing felt like her. It wasn't until a week later, sitting by the creek where she had first heard the wolves howl, that the answer came to her. She had been watching the water flow over the rocks, mesmerized by the way it caught the light and turned it into diamonds. And she had thought about all the things she wanted to be, all the things she was learning to believe she could be, strong, brave, worthy. And then she thought about the mountains that rose in the distance, their peaks eternal and unchanging. She thought about how they had been there for millions of years, standing tall through storms and earthquakes and the slow erosion of time. Stone. She wanted to be like stone. Lena Stone, she said out loud, testing the words on her tongue. They felt solid, real. They felt like something she could grow into. She told Marcus that night at dinner. Stone, he repeated, turning the name over in his mind. Lena Stone. I like it. You do? I do. He nodded slowly. It suits you, strong, steady, hard to break. Lena smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and stayed there. Lena Stone, she said again, and for the first time in her life, her name felt like it belonged to her. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the valley in white and transforming the world into something out of a fairy tale. Lena stood on the porch of the main house, watching the flakes drift down from a sky the color of pewter. She was wrapped in a warm coat that Rosa had found for her feet in sturdy boots that didn't leak, her hands covered in gloves that actually fit. 6 months ago, she had been abandoned on a forest trail with nothing but crumbs in her pocket and the certainty of her own eventual death. Now she was here. Warm, fed, safe, loved. She still couldn't quite believe it. Marcus came out to stand beside her, 2 cups of hot cider in his hands. He offered one to her, and she took it gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, nodding at the snow. I've never seen anything like it. She took a sip of the cider, savoring the warmth as it spread through her chest. The snow in Helena was always dirty, gray. This is clean, Marcus finished for her. Everything's clean after a fresh snow, like the world is starting over. They stood in silence for a while, watching the flakes fall. Marcus, Lena said finally. Thank you. The words came out small, almost swallowed by the quiet of the snowfall. For everything. For stopping on that trail. For bringing me here. For... She trailed off, unable to find the right words. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. A simple gesture, but one that carried more meaning than any words could have conveyed. You don't have to thank me, he said. This is what family does. Family. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Lena didn't know if she had a family. She didn't know if she was allowed to call these people, this man, this woman, this ranch, her own. She had been abandoned so many times that the very concept of belonging felt dangerous, like a beautiful dream that could shatter at any moment. But standing there on the porch, with the snow falling around them and the cider warm in her hands and Marcus's steady presence beside her, she allowed herself to believe it. Maybe she did have a family. Maybe, after everything, she had finally found a place where she belonged. The thought was terrifying, but it was also wonderful. And as Lena Stone, watched the snow transform the valley into something magical, she felt something shift inside her chest. Hope. Real hope. The kind that didn't need to be protected or hidden or kept small. She was finally learning what it meant to be someone who mattered. Winter settled over the valley like a quiet promise, and Lena Stone learned what it meant to belong somewhere. The snow that had seemed so magical on that first November morning became a constant companion, piling up against the fences and drifting across the trails and transforming the ranch into an island of warmth in a sea of white. The work changed with the season. Less riding, more mending, more time spent in the barn making sure the animals were fed and sheltered and warm. And through it all, Lena grew. Not just physically, though that continued too. She was taller now, stronger, her body finally catching up to the years of neglect it had endured. But the real growth was happening somewhere deeper, in places she couldn't see or measure. She was learning to trust, learning to hope, learning to believe that the people around her weren't going to disappear the moment she let her guard down. It was terrifying, but it was also wonderful. Marcus taught her everything he knew about the land. He showed her how to read the weather in the clouds, how to find water in places that looked bone dry, how to track animals through the snow and identify plants that could heal or harm. He taught her the names of the mountains that surrounded the valley, the history of the trails that crisscrossed the property, the stories of the people who had lived and died on this land long before either of them was born. "This ranch isn't just dirt and grass," he told her one afternoon as they rode the fence line together, checking for damage from a recent storm. "It's memory. Every acre has a story. Every hill remembers something." Lena looked out over the snow-covered valley, trying to see what he saw. "What does this hill remember?" "This is where I asked Catherine to marry me." Marcus's voice was soft, touched with old grief and older love. 40 years ago, almost to the day. We were young and foolish and didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, but I knew, the moment I saw her, that I wanted to spend my life with her." "And she said yes?" "She laughed first." A smile crossed his weathered face. "Said I was crazy, said we couldn't afford a wedding, let alone a marriage. But then she looked at me, really looked, and she said yes." He paused. "Best decision I ever made. Best decision she ever made too, I think." Lena was quiet for a moment, watching the wind lift snow from the ridge and scatter it across the sky like glitter. "Do you miss her?" "Every day." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Every single day. But missing her doesn't mean I stopped living. Catherine wouldn't have wanted that. She would have kicked my backside from here to Helena if I'd given up on life just because she wasn't in it anymore." He turned to look at Lena, and his eyes were kind. "That's the thing about love," he said. "Real love. It doesn't end when someone's gone, it just changes. Becomes something you carry with you instead of something you hold in your hands." Lena thought about her father, about the way he used to lift her onto his shoulders and carry her through the streets of Copper Ridge, pointing out stars and making up stories about the shapes they formed. She had tried so hard not to think about him for so many years, afraid that the memories would break her apart. But maybe Marcus was right. Maybe love didn't have to be something that hurt. Maybe it could be something that healed instead. "I think I understand," she said quietly. Marcus reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "I know you do." Spring came slowly to the valley, melting the snow in patches and coaxing green shoots from the frozen ground. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and the ranch stirred back to life like a creature waking from a long sleep. And with the spring came the calving season. Lena had heard the ranch hands talking about it for weeks. The late nights, the difficult births, the constant worry that something would go wrong. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of watching a new life enter the world. She was in the barn when it happened, helping Tom check on a heifer that had been laboring for hours. The animal was exhausted, her sides heaving with each contraction, and Tom's face was grim. "She's struggling," he said, pulling off his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Calf's turned wrong. We might need to help her along." "What can I do?" Tom looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. In the months since her arrival, Lena had become a familiar presence on the ranch, but she was still a child in their eyes, still someone to be protected rather than relied upon. "You sure you want to be here for this?" he asked. "It's not going to be pretty." Lena thought about all the things she had survived: the orphanage, Martha's farm, the forest trail, the wolves in the darkness, and the hunger that never quite went away. "I'm sure," she said. What followed was the most exhausting night of her life. She held the lantern while Tom worked, fetching water and towels and whatever else he needed. The heifer bellowed in pain, and Lena winced with every sound, but she didn't look away. She had learned long ago that looking away didn't make the hard things easier. It just meant you weren't prepared when they came for you. And then, just as the first light of dawn was creeping over the mountains, the calf was born. It slid into the world wet and trembling, its eyes blinking against the sudden brightness. The heifer turned her head to look at her baby, and something changed in her expression, exhaustion giving way to something fiercer, more primal. She began to lick the calf clean, her tongue rough and insistent, and within minutes the little creature was trying to stand. "There you go," Tom murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. "There you go, little one." Lena watched the calf struggle to its feet, wobbling on legs that seemed too long for its body. It fell twice, 3 times, but each time it got back up, driven by an instinct older than thought. And then it was standing, swaying a little, but standing. "That's the thing about being born," Tom said, glancing at Lena. "Nobody teaches you how to stand up, you just have to figure it out." Lena thought about that for a long time afterward, about all the times she had fallen and gotten back up, about all the times she had wanted to stay down and hadn't. Maybe that was what surviving meant, not never falling, but always getting back up. Marcus found her in the barn later that morning, sitting on a hay bale and watching the calf nurse from its mother. The exhaustion hadn't quite caught up with her yet, but she could feel it coming, a heaviness in her bones that promised deep sleep when she finally gave in. "Tom told me you helped with the birth," Marcus said, settling onto the hay bale beside her. Lena nodded, not taking her eyes off the calf. It was intense. First time seeing something born? First time seeing something alive come out of something that looked like it might die. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "That's what this work is," he said finally. "That's what ranching is. Watching things live and die and live again, being part of the cycle, not fighting against it." "Is that why you do it? Why you've spent your whole life here?" "Part of it." He leaned back, his eyes distant. "But mostly, I do it because this is home. Because the land knows me, and I know it. Because when I'm out there, riding the fence lines or bringing in the cattle, I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself." Lena understood that feeling. She was beginning to feel it too. The sense that she belonged here, that the ranch was becoming part of her just as she was becoming part of it. It was still fragile, still uncertain, but it was growing stronger every day. "I want to learn everything," she said suddenly. "Not just riding and roping, everything. How to run this place, how to take care of it." Marcus looked at her, and something like pride flickered across his face. "Why?" "Because..." She hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Because I've spent my whole life being taken care of by people who didn't want me. I want to know how to take care of something myself. I want to know that if everything falls apart again, I can build something new." It was more than she had meant to say, more than she had known she was feeling until the words came out. But once they were spoken, she knew they were true. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "We'll start tomorrow. But I warn you, it's not easy. Running a ranch takes more than muscle. It takes patience and wisdom, and the ability to make hard decisions when everything in you wants to take the easy way out. I'm not afraid of hard. I know you're not." He smiled, and for the first time, Lena saw something in his eyes that looked like faith. "That's why I think you might just be good at this." The months that followed were the hardest of Lena's life, and the best. True to his word, Marcus taught her everything, not just the physical skills of ranching, but the deeper knowledge that came from decades of working the land. He taught her how to read the cattle market, how to negotiate with buyers, how to balance the books so that the ranch stayed profitable year after year. He taught her about breeding and bloodlines, about which animals to keep and which to sell, about the delicate calculus of running a business that depended on factors beyond anyone's control. "Weather can break you," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching storm clouds gather over the mountains. "One bad winter, one drought, one flood. That's all it takes. You have to plan for disaster even when things are going well, especially when things are going well. How do you plan for something you can't predict? You save. You diversify. You build relationships with people who can help you when you need it." He paused. "And you accept that sometimes, no matter what you do, things will go wrong anyway. That's not failure. That's just life." Lena absorbed every word, every lesson, every piece of wisdom Marcus was willing to share. She was hungry for knowledge in a way she had never been before, not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be. For the first time, she was learning things that felt like they mattered, things that could shape her future instead of just getting her through the present. But it wasn't all lessons and work. There were quiet moments, too, Evenings spent reading by the fire, Sunday dinners with Rosa and the ranch hands, long rides through the valley just for the joy of it. There was laughter sometimes, and stories, and the slow accumulation of memories that didn't hurt to hold. And there was the growing certainty, deeper with each passing day, that she had found something she had never thought she would have: a home. It was late August when the riders came. Lena was in the south pasture, checking on a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, when she saw them approaching. 3 men on horseback, moving fast along the main trail, their horses kicking up dust that hung in the hot summer air like smoke. Something about them made her uneasy. She couldn't have said what it was. Maybe the way they rode, hard and purposeful, or maybe the way they held themselves, shoulders squared and chins raised like men who expected to be obeyed. Whatever it was, it made her instincts prickle with warning. She finished her work quickly and rode back toward the main house, arriving just as the strangers were dismounting in the yard. Marcus was already there, standing on the porch with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Rosa hovered in the doorway behind him, her face tight with worry. "Mr. Hale." The lead rider tipped his hat, but there was no respect in the gesture. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "Been a while." "Garrett," Marcus's voice was flat. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Life's full of surprises." The man, Garrett, let his eyes wander over the property, taking in the barn, the corrals, the horses grazing in the distance. "Place looks good. You've done well for yourself." "I've worked hard." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The way I see it, you've got more than your share, more land than any one man needs, more cattle, more everything." His gaze settled on Marcus with predatory intensity. "My father never got over losing that south section to you, ate at him until the day he died." "Your father lost that land fair and square. He bet it in a card game, and he lost. That's not my fault." "Maybe not. But here's the thing." Garrett stepped forward, and his men moved with him, flanking him like wolves around a pack leader. "I don't care about fair. I care about what's mine. And the way I see it, that south section should have stayed in my family." Lena had dismounted and was standing near the corner of the house, watching the confrontation unfold. Her heart was pounding, and her palms were slick with sweat, but she didn't move, didn't draw attention to herself. "You're not getting that land, Garrett." Marcus's voice was hard as iron. "Not today, not ever. Your father made his choices, and those choices have consequences. That's how the world works. The world works, however, the strong decide it works." Garrett's smile widened. "And right now, I'm the strong one. I've got men, I've got resources, I've got..." His eyes flickered toward Lena, noticing her for the first time, and something ugly crossed his face. "What's this? You've got yourself a little orphan now?" Lena felt the words like a physical blow. Orphan. The word she had carried with her for so long, the label that marked her as unwanted and discarded. "Her name is Lena," Marcus said, and there was a warning in his voice that made Garrett's men shift uneasily. "And she's none of your concern." "Everything on this ranch is my concern." Garrett turned back to Marcus, dismissing Lena as easily as he might dismiss a fly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over the south section. The papers are already drawn up. All you have to do is put your name on them, and we'll be on our way." "And if I refuse?" "Then things get complicated." Garrett's voice dropped, taking on a tone of menace that made the hair on Lena's arms stand up. "I've got lawyers. I've got connections. I can make your life very difficult, Hale, drag you through courts until you're buried in debt, challenge your land claims going back generations. By the time I'm done with you, you won't have a ranch left to defend." The threat hung in the air like poison. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Lena watched him, her heart in her throat, waiting for him to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, and utterly unyielding. "Get off my land." Garrett blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Get off my land. Take your men and your threats and your papers, and don't come back. This conversation is over." For a moment, Garrett looked genuinely surprised, like a man who had expected an easy victory and found a stone wall instead. Then his expression hardened, and the mask of civility dropped away entirely. "You're making a mistake, Hale." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Marcus uncrossed his arms and stepped down from the porch, putting himself directly in front of Garrett. Despite the age difference, despite the fact that Garrett was bigger and younger and had two armed men at his back, Marcus didn't flinch. "This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations," he said, his voice low and fierce. "I built it with my own hands. I buried my wife here. I buried my daughter here. Every inch of this land has been soaked in my sweat and my blood and my tears. And you think you can walk in here with some piece of paper and take it from me?" He stepped closer until he and Garrett were almost nose to nose. "Try it," Marcus said. "Try it and see what happens." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Garrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that broke the tension without dissolving it. "You've got spine, old man. I'll give you that." He stepped back, adjusting his hat. "But spine won't save you when the lawyers come. We'll be back. And next time, I won't be so polite." He swung back onto his horse, and his men followed suit. Within moments, they were riding away, their dust trail marking their passage like a scar across the land. Marcus watched them go, his jaw set and his fists clenched at his sides. Lena approached slowly, uncertain what to say. "Marcus?" she said softly. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he let out a breath and turned to look at her. "The Garrett family has been a thorn in my side for 30 years, he said, his voice weary. "Jacob Garrett, that man's father, was my neighbor back when I was just starting out. We used to be friends, believe it or not. Then came the card game and the land, and suddenly we were enemies." "He died?" "5 years ago, bitter and broken and convinced that everything that went wrong in his life was my fault." Marcus shook his head. "Now his son is picking up where he left off, and he's more dangerous than his father ever was." "What are we going to do?" Marcus looked at her, really looked, taking in the fear in her eyes and the determination underneath it. "We," he repeated. "You said we." Lena hadn't realized she'd said it until he pointed it out. But it was true. This wasn't just Marcus's fight anymore. It was hers too. "This is my home," she said, and saying it out loud made it feel more real than ever before. "I'm not going to let anyone take it away." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. The weariness faded, replaced by something fiercer, something that looked like hope. "Then we fight," he said. "Together. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The weeks that followed were tense with waiting. Marcus hired a lawyer from Helena, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Pemberton who reviewed his land claims and declared them solid. "Garrett doesn't have a legal leg to stand on," she said. "His father lost that land fair and square. The documentation is clear." "Then why is he pushing so hard?" "Because he's betting you'll back down. He's betting that the threat of a long, expensive legal battle will make you settle." She smiled grimly. "He doesn't know you very well, does he?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, he doesn't." The lawyer's confidence was reassuring, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years. They had kept her alive when everything else had failed, and her instincts were screaming that Garrett wasn't finished. She was right. The attack came on a moonless night in early September, when the darkness was so complete that Lena couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She woke to the sound of shouting and the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire. By the time she reached the yard, chaos had erupted. Ranch hands were running everywhere, hauling buckets of water from the well, trying to contain flames that had already consumed the south wall of the barn. The horses were screaming, a sound Lena had never heard before and never wanted to hear again. And Marcus was in the thick of it, directing the firefighting effort with a voice that cut through the pandemonium like a blade. "The horses!" he shouted. "Get the horses out! Everything else can be replaced." Lena didn't hesitate. She ran toward the barn, ignoring the heat that scorched her skin and the smoke that seared her lungs. The main doors were still open, and she could see shapes moving inside, horses rearing and kicking in their stalls, too panicked to save themselves. She found Bella first. The mare was wild-eyed with terror, her coat already singed, her hooves striking sparks from the stone floor as she fought to escape.
Lena grabbed her halter and held on, using every ounce of strength she had to drag the horse toward the doors. "Come on," she gasped. "Come on, Bella, please." The mare resisted for one terrible moment, then seemed to recognize Lena's voice and allowed herself to be led. They burst out of the barn together, and Lena handed Bella off to one of the ranch hands before turning back. There were more horses inside, more lives to save. She didn't know how many trips she made, didn't know how many horses she pulled from the flames. All she knew was the heat and the smoke and the desperate need to keep moving, to keep fighting, to not let the fire win. It was Tom who finally pulled her away. Lena, stop!" He grabbed her arm and dragged her back from the burning building. "The roof's coming down. You can't go back in there." "But there are still—" "We got them out. We got them all out." His face was streaked with soot and sweat, but his eyes were clear. "You did good, kid. You did real good." The roof collapsed moments later, sending a pillar of flame and sparks shooting into the sky. Lena watched it fall, her heart pounding, her lungs aching, her eyes stinging from the smoke. They had saved the horses, they had saved the cattle, they had saved each other. But the barn was gone. Dawn revealed the full extent of the damage. The barn was nothing but charred timber and ash, still smoldering in the morning light. The south fence had burned too, and several acres of grassland were blackened and dead. The smell of smoke hung over everything, thick and acrid, impossible to escape. Marcus stood in the yard, surveying the destruction with a face like stone. "This was arson," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Garrett did this." "We can't prove it," Tom said. "No witnesses. No evidence." "I don't need evidence. I know." Marcus turned to look at the ranch hands gathered around him, exhausted, soot-covered, shaken. "He thinks this will break us. He thinks we'll give up, sign over the land, walk away." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "He's wrong." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. "We're going to rebuild," Marcus continued. "Every beam, every nail, every inch of what we lost. And when Garrett comes back, because he will come back, he's going to find us stronger than before." His eyes found Lena in the crowd. "All of us." Lena stepped forward. Her clothes were ruined, her hair was singed, and her throat was raw from the smoke she had inhaled. But her voice was steady when she spoke. "This is our home," she said. "No one takes it from us. No one." It was the first time she had spoken in front of the whole group, and she felt their eyes on her, curious, appraising, reassessing. She wasn't just Mr. Hale's orphan anymore. She was one of them. Someone who had run into a burning barn to save their horses. Someone who had stood her ground when everything was falling apart. Someone who belonged. Marcus nodded at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The rebuilding started the next day. Word spread quickly through the valley, and help arrived from neighboring ranches, men with tools and timber, and the unspoken understanding that today's disaster could be tomorrow's lesson. They came in wagons and on horseback, bringing supplies and labor and the kind of practical compassion that didn't need to be named. Lena worked alongside them, learning as she went. She learned how to raise a beam and set a nail, how to measure and cut and fit pieces together until they became something whole. She learned that building was harder than destroying, but also more satisfying, that there was something almost sacred about creating something with your own hands. And she learned that she wasn't alone. The community had embraced her in ways she hadn't expected. Neighbors who had never spoken to her before now greeted her by name. Ranch hands who had once kept their distance now saved her a seat at meals, included her in conversations, treated her like one of their own. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She had spent so long being invisible, being nothing, being dead weight. Being seen, being valued, felt like standing on solid ground after years of quicksand. The new barn took 3 weeks to complete. It was smaller than the original, built with whatever materials they could gather on short notice, but it was strong and sound, and theirs. On the day they finished, Marcus gathered everyone together for a celebration. Rosa had prepared a feast, and someone had brought a fiddle, and before long the yard was full of music and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from surviving something hard together. Lena sat on the porch, watching it all, still not quite able to believe she was part of it. Marcus came to sit beside her,
2 glasses of cider in his hands. He offered her one, and she took it. "You did well," he said. "During the fire, during the rebuilding. You've grown a lot since I found you on that trail." "I had good teachers." "Maybe." He smiled. "But the learning, that was all you. No one can teach you to be brave. You either are or you aren't. And you, Lena Stone, are one of the bravest people I know." The words settled into her chest like warmth. "I still have a lot to learn," she said. "We all do. That's what life is, learning and then learning some more." He paused, his eyes drifting to the new barn, the repaired fences, the land that stretched toward the mountains. "But I think you're ready for the next step." "What next step?" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her, and she opened it with trembling fingers. It was a map of the ranch, hand-drawn and detailed, but there was something different about it, something that made her breath catch in her throat. In the corner, written in Marcus's careful handwriting, were 3 words: Lena's section, south. "That's the south pasture," Marcus said. "The land Garrett wants so badly. I'm giving it to you." Lena stared at him. "I don't understand." "It's simple. The land is yours. Legally, officially yours. I've already talked to Sarah. She's drawing up the papers." He met her eyes, and his expression was fierce. "Garrett thinks he can take what doesn't belong to him. He thinks he can bully and burn and threaten his way to what he wants. I want him to know that even if something happened to me, the land would still be protected, still be in the hands of someone who deserves it." "Marcus, I can't." "You can, and you will." His voice softened. "This isn't charity, Lena. This is recognition. Recognition of who you are and what you've become. You've earned this, every inch of it." Lena looked down at the map in her hands, her section, her land, something that was hers not because someone gave it to her out of pity, but because she had proven herself worthy of it. "What if Garrett comes back?" she asked. "What if he comes for this land specifically?" "Then you defend it." Marcus's voice was steady. "The same way you defended those horses in the fire. The same way you've defended yourself your whole life. You fight, and you win." She didn't know if she could do that. Didn't know if she was strong enough, brave enough, good enough to stand against a man like Garrett and everything he represented. But looking at the map, looking at her name written in Marcus's hand, she wanted to try. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll do it." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the fire, the weariness seemed to lift from his shoulders. "I know you will." 3 days later, Garrett returned. He came alone this time, riding up to the main house in the late afternoon, his horse lathered and his face dark with barely contained fury. Word had reached him, apparently, about the changes Marcus had made, about the land that was no longer his to threaten. Lena was in the yard when he arrived. She had been helping Tom repair a section of fence near the house, and she straightened as Garrett dismounted, her heart pounding, but her face calm. She had been preparing for this moment since Marcus had shown her the map, had been thinking about what she would say, how she would stand, who she would be. "Where's Hale?" Garrett demanded. "Mr. Hale is in town." Lena's voice was steady. "He won't be back until tomorrow." Garrett looked at her, really looked, for the first time. His eyes narrowed, taking in the way she stood, the set of her jaw, the absence of fear in her expression. "You're the orphan," he said, "the stray he picked up." "My name is Lena Stone, and I'm not a stray." "You're nothing." The word was a weapon, designed to wound. "You're nobody, a piece of trash someone threw away and another fool decided to keep." Once those words would have destroyed her. Once she would have crumbled under the weight of them, believing every syllable, because believing was easier than fighting. But that was before Marcus, before the ranch, before she learned what it meant to belong somewhere. "I'm the owner of the south section," Lena said, "the land you want so badly. It's mine now legally and officially, and I'm not giving it up." Garrett's face went red. For a moment he looked like he might strike her, might raise his hand and bring it down with all the force of his rage. But Lena didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't give him even an inch of ground. "You think a piece of paper changes anything?" he snarled. "You think owning land makes you somebody? You're still the same worthless orphan you've always been, the same nothing. Maybe, Lena's voice was quiet but fierce, but this nothing is standing on her own land, looking you in the eye and telling you to leave. So which one of us is really worth nothing? The silence that followed was electric. Garrett stared at her, his fury giving way to something else, something that looked almost like grudging respect, quickly buried. "This isn't over," he said finally, "not by a long shot." "Maybe not. But today it is." Lena pointed toward the gate. "That's the way out. I suggest you use it. For a moment she thought he might refuse, thought he might escalate, might push the confrontation into violence. But something in her expression, or maybe something in his own calculations, made him stop. He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Lena watched him go, her heart still pounding, her hands still steady. She had done it. She had stood her ground against the man who wanted to take everything from her, and she hadn't backed down. Not today. Not ever again. When Marcus returned the next day and heard what had happened, he found Lena in the south pasture, standing at the fence line and looking out over the land that was now hers. "Tom told me about Garrett," he said, coming to stand beside her. "About what you said to him. Was I wrong to confront him?" "No." Marcus shook his head. "You were exactly right. You showed him that this land has a defender, that it won't be easy to take. He said it's not over. It probably isn't. Men like Garrett don't give up easily." He paused. "But neither do we." Lena looked out over the pasture, the grass rippling in the wind, the mountains rising in the distance, the sky stretching endless and blue above it all. This was hers. This piece of the world, this corner of existence, belonged to her. Not because someone had given it to her out of pity, not because she had inherited it by accident of birth, but because she had earned it, because she had proven herself worthy. "I used to think being worth something meant being wanted by other people," she said quietly. "I spent my whole life trying to be good enough, useful enough, small enough to make someone keep me. And it never worked. No matter what I did, they always threw me away." Marcus was silent, listening. "But now I understand," Lena continued. "Being worth something doesn't come from other people. It comes from you, from what you do, from who you choose to be." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You taught me that, you and this ranch, and everyone here." Marcus reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. "I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know," he said. "I just gave you a place to remember it." They stood there together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The land spread out before them, vast and beautiful, and full of possibility. And Lena Stone, the girl who had once been left on a trail to die, who had once believed she was worth nothing, stood tall and unafraid. She had a home now, a family, a piece of land to call her own, and she would defend it with everything she had. The autumn that followed was the most peaceful Lena had ever known. The threat of Garrett lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon, but for now, the skies were clear. The ranch settled into its seasonal rhythm. The cattle were brought down from the high pastures, and the last of the hay was stored in the newly rebuilt barn. The days grew shorter, the nights grew colder, and life went on. And Lena went on with it. She was different now, in ways that even she couldn't fully articulate. The girl who had arrived at the ranch 18 months ago, starving, terrified, convinced of her own worthlessness, had been replaced by someone stronger. Someone who walked with her head up and her shoulders back. Someone who looked people in the eye when she spoke and didn't apologize for taking up space. The south section was hers, and she treated it with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had finally found something worth defending. She rode the fence lines every morning, checking for damage, noting the health of the grass and the movement of the wildlife. She learned the contours of the land so thoroughly that she could have navigated it blindfolded, every hill, every hollow, every stream and stone. "You're out there more than the cattle are," Tom joked one evening as they sat around the fire in the bunkhouse. "Starting to think you're part of the landscape." "Maybe I am," Lena said, and she meant it. Marcus watched her transformation with something like wonder. He had hoped, when he brought her to the ranch, that she might heal, that the food and safety and stability might help her become something like the child she should have been. But he hadn't expected this. This fierce, capable young woman who was growing into the land as surely as the roots of the ancient oaks. "You've done well," he told her one afternoon as they rode together through the south pasture. "Better than I could have imagined. I had help. Everyone has help. What matters is what you do with it." He reined his horse to a stop, looking out over the golden grass. "When I found you on that trail, you were barely surviving. Now look at you. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving." Lena felt the warmth of his words settle into her chest. She had never been praised like this before. Never been told that she was doing well, that she was enough, that she had value. Every compliment still felt like a gift, rare and precious and not quite real. "I still have a lot to learn," she said. "Always. That never stops." Marcus smiled. "But you've learned the most important lesson already." "What's that?" "How to believe in yourself." He turned to look at her. "Everything else follows from that. The skills, the knowledge, the ability to lead. None of it matters if you don't believe you're capable. And you do. I can see it in the way you carry yourself." Lena looked down at her hands, calloused and strong from months of work. She remembered when those hands had been soft and weak, trembling with fear and hunger and the constant expectation of pain. She remembered when she had believed she was nothing. She didn't believe that anymore. Winter came early that year, bringing snow and ice and the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. The ranch hunkered down against the weather, and the days took on a rhythm of feeding and checking and keeping everything alive until spring. It was during one of those long winter nights that Marcus first spoke about the future. They were in the study, sitting by the fire while a blizzard raged outside. Rosa had gone to bed hours ago, and the house was quiet except for the pop of the logs and the howl of the wind. Lena was reading. She had discovered a love of books in the past year, devouring everything in Marcus's library. But she looked up when he cleared his throat. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he said. His voice was serious, and something in his expression made her set down her book. "What is it?" He was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "I'm not getting any younger," he said finally. "Another winter like this one. Another summer of hard work. I don't know how many I have left." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Don't talk like that." "I'm not being morbid. I'm being practical." He turned to look at her. "This ranch is my life's work. Everything I've built, everything I've fought for. It's all here. And when I'm gone, it needs to pass to someone who will take care of it." "You have time," Lena said. "Years and years. You don't need to think about this now." "I think about it every day." His voice was gentle but firm. "That's what it means to be responsible for something. You plan, you prepare, you make sure that when you're gone, what you've built continues." He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a stack of papers, thick and official-looking. He set them on the table between them. "I've talked to Sarah," he said. "These are the papers. Everything's in order." Lena looked at the stack, her heart pounding. "What papers?" "Adoption papers." Marcus's eyes met hers. "If you agree to it, if you want it, I'd like to make you my legal daughter, my heir, the one who inherits this ranch when I'm gone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the papers on the table and try to make sense of what she was hearing. Adoption, daughter, heir, words she had never thought would apply to her, words that belonged to other people, real people, wanted people, people who hadn't been thrown away like garbage on a forest trail. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? You could leave the ranch to anyone, Tom or Rosa, or I don't want to leave it to anyone." Marcus's voice was fierce. "I want to leave it to you, because you're the one who deserves it, because you're the one who will protect it, because—" He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because you're the daughter I never expected to have, the family I thought I'd lost forever." Lena felt tears burning in her eyes. She tried to blink them back, but they spilled over anyway, running down her cheeks in hot, silent streams. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," Marcus continued. "This is a big decision. You should take time to think about it.
Make sure it's what you want." "What I want?" The words came out broken, barely audible. "No one's ever asked me what I want. No one's ever cared." "I care." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "I care what you want. I care what you feel. I care about you, Lena. Not because of what you can do for this ranch, but because of who you are.
And if you decide you don't want this, if you decide you want to leave, find your own path, build your own life somewhere else, I'll support that too. Whatever you choose, I'm on your side." Lena stared at their joined hands, his weathered and worn, hers still young, but marked by work and time. She thought about everything she had been through, all the people who had abandoned her, all the years she had spent believing she was worthless. And she thought about Marcus, about how he had stopped on that trail when no one else would have, about how he had given her space instead of demands, trust instead of conditions, about how he had believed in her even when she couldn't believe in herself.
"Yes," she said. Marcus blinked. "What?" "Yes." Her voice was stronger now, certain. "I don't need time to think about it. I know what I want. I want to stay here. I want to be part of this family. I want—" She took a shaky breath. "I want to be your daughter." For a moment, Marcus didn't move. Then something broke open in his expression, something that had been held tight for years, decades maybe, since he buried his wife and his daughter beneath the old oak tree on the hill. "Come here," he said, his voice rough. And Lena went. He held her while she cried, really cried, not the silent tears she had trained herself to hide, but deep, racking sobs that shook her whole body. He held her and let her cry, and he didn't tell her to stop or be quiet or control herself. He just held her, the way a father holds a child, and let her feel everything she had been too afraid to feel for so long. When the tears finally stopped, Lena pulled back and looked at him. His eyes were wet too, though he hadn't made a sound. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For saving me." "You saved yourself," Marcus said. "I just gave you a chance." The adoption was finalized in the spring, on a day so beautiful it seemed like the world itself was celebrating. Sarah Pemberton came to the ranch with the final papers, and there was a small ceremony in the study with Rosa and Tom and a few of the ranch hands as witnesses. Lena signed her name, Lena Stone Hale, and watched as Marcus signed his, and then it was done. She was his daughter, legally, officially, irrevocably his. Rosa cried. Tom cleared his throat and looked away, and Marcus pulled Lena into another embrace, holding her tight against his chest. "Welcome home," he whispered. "For real this time." They celebrated that night with a feast that Rosa had been planning for weeks. There was roasted beef and fresh bread and vegetables from the greenhouse, and someone had managed to procure a cake from the bakery in town, chocolate, with white frosting and Lena's new name written across the top in careful script. The ranch hands raised glasses of whiskey and cider, toasting to Lena, to Marcus, to the future of the ranch. There was music and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people who care about you. Lena sat in the middle of it all, still not quite able to believe it was real. She had a family now, a father, a home that was legally, permanently hers. She had everything she had ever wanted, everything she had ever dreamed of, everything she had once believed was impossible. And it terrified her, because she knew better than anyone that good things didn't last, that happiness was temporary, that the moment you started to believe you were safe, the world would find a way to prove you wrong. She tried to push the fear away, tried to focus on the celebration around her, but it lingered in the back of her mind, a shadow that wouldn't quite disappear. What if this was all a dream? What if she woke up tomorrow and found herself back on that forest trail, alone and abandoned and forgotten? What if she lost everything again? Marcus found her later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had gone home. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Too much to think about." "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" Lena was quiet for a moment. "Both," she admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for all of this to disappear." "Ah," Marcus nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." "You do?" "Of course."
When Catherine and I first started building this place, I spent years convinced that it would all fall apart, that we'd lose the land, lose the cattle, lose each other. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain that disaster was just around the corner. What changed? Nothing changed. He smiled. I just learned to live with the fear, to accept that bad things might happen, but that didn't mean I should stop enjoying the good things while I had them. He turned to look at her. The fear never goes away completely, Lena. Not when you've lost as much as we have. But it gets smaller, and the joy gets bigger. Eventually, the joy wins. How long does that take? Different for everyone. But I can tell you this, it's already started for you. I've seen it. The way you smile now, the way you laugh, the way you look at this land like it's part of your soul. He paused. You're healing, Lena, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the fear would fade, that the joy would grow, that she would eventually stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the shadow was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind. And somewhere deep down, she knew it would take more than words to make it go away. Spring turned to summer, and summer brought work. Endless, exhausting, satisfying work that left Lena too tired to worry about anything except the task in front of her. The cattle needed to be moved to the high pastures. The fences needed to be repaired after the winter's damage. The hay needed to be cut and baled and stored for the coming year. There was always something to do, always something that needed her attention, and Lena threw herself into it with everything she had. She was riding the fence line of the south section one afternoon, checking for breaks, when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. She reined Bella to a stop, her head tilted, listening. The wind was blowing from the east, carrying sounds from the direction of the old creek bed that marked the boundary between her land and Garrett's. There it was again. A voice, small, frightened, calling for help. Lena kicked Bella into a gallop, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she would find, didn't know if it was a trap, a trick, another move in Garrett's endless game. But she couldn't ignore it, couldn't ride away from someone who needed help, not when she knew what it felt like to need help and have no one come. She found the child in a ravine near the creek, a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with tangled dark hair and a dress so dirty it was impossible to tell what color it had once been. She was huddled against a rock, her arms wrapped around her knees, and when she saw Lena approaching, her eyes went wide with terror. "Don't hurt me," she whispered. "Please don't hurt me." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She knew that tone, that posture, that desperate, hopeless fear. She had been that girl once, on another trail, in another life. "I'm not going to hurt you." Lena dismounted slowly, keeping her movements gentle and non-threatening. "My name is Lena. I live on the ranch up the hill. What's your name?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at Lena with those huge, terrified eyes, her whole body trembling. "Are you hurt?" Lena tried again. "Are you hungry?" At the word hungry, something flickered in the girl's expression. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Okay." Lena reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the lunch Rosa had packed for her that morning, a sandwich, an apple, a canteen of water. She set them on the ground between her and the girl, then stepped back to give her space. "It's for you," she said. "Take as much as you want. I won't come any closer." The girl stared at the food like it might explode. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she crawled forward and grabbed the sandwich. She tore into it with a ferocity that made Lena's heart ache, barely chewing before she swallowed, already reaching for the apple before the first bite was finished. Lena watched her eat, and she felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition, a responsibility. "Where are your parents?" she asked gently, once the girl had slowed down enough to breathe. "Don't have any." The words came out flat, empty. "Mama died last winter. Papa left before I was born." "Who's taking care of you?" "Nobody." The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I was living with the Hendersons, but they said they couldn't afford to feed me anymore. They put me on a wagon and told me to go find work somewhere else." The same story, the same abandonment, the same cruelty dressed up as necessity. Lena felt rage building in her chest, rage at the Hendersons, at everyone who had ever thrown away a child like garbage.
at a world that could be so casually brutal to the most vulnerable people in it, but she forced the rage down. It wouldn't help right now. What would help was action. "What's your name?" she asked again. This time the girl answered. "Molly." "Molly," Lena smiled, trying to make her voice as warm and safe as possible. "I want you to come with me, back to my ranch. You can have a real meal, a bath, a bed to sleep in. Nobody's going to hurt you there. Nobody's going to send you away." Molly stared at her, distrust written across every inch of her face. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I know enough." Lena thought about Marcus, about how he had stopped on that trail when no one else would have, about how he had offered her food without asking for anything in return. "I know what it's like to be alone and scared and convinced that no one in the world cares whether you live or die. And I know that sometimes all it takes to change everything is one person who stops." She held out her hand. "Let me be that person for you," she said, "the way someone was that person for me." Molly looked at her hand, looked at her face, looked at the horse waiting patiently behind her, and then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Marcus met them in the yard when they arrived. He had been working in the barn, but he came out when he heard the hoofbeats, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes widened when he saw Molly sitting in front of Lena on the horse, small and dirty and clearly terrified. "Who do we have here?" he asked, his voice carefully gentle. "This is Molly." Lena dismounted and helped the girl down after her. "I found her in the ravine by the south boundary. She's been abandoned, same as I was." Something passed across Marcus's face. A shadow of old pain, old memories. He looked at Molly, really looked, and Lena knew he was seeing the same thing she had seen. Himself, all those years ago, facing a choice about whether to help a stranger or ride on by. "Welcome to the ranch, Molly," he said. "Let's get you inside and get some food in you." Molly looked at Lena, uncertain. Lena nodded. "It's okay," she said. "He's my father. He's the one who saved me, and he'll help you too." Rosa fussed over Molly like she was a long-lost granddaughter, drawing her a bath and finding her clean clothes and preparing a meal that was more food than the girl had probably seen in weeks. Molly ate in silence, her eyes darting around the kitchen like she expected someone to come and take it all away. Lena sat with her, not pushing, not asking questions, just being there, being present, being the steady, safe presence that she had so desperately needed when she first arrived at this ranch. After the meal, Rosa took Molly upstairs to one of the spare bedrooms, and Lena found herself alone with Marcus in the kitchen. "She's in bad shape," Marcus said quietly. "Worse than you were, maybe. She's been through a lot. So have you." He looked at her. "Are you sure about this, Lena? Taking on a child is a big responsibility. It changes everything." "I know." Lena thought about the girl upstairs, small and broken and so desperately in need of someone to care. "But I didn't have a choice, Marcus. I saw her there, and I knew. I knew I had to help her, because you helped me, because that's what this ranch is supposed to be." "What do you mean?" "A place where people who've been thrown away can find a home." She met his eyes. "That's what it was for me. That's what it can be for her. And maybe for others too. I don't know yet. But I know that I can't ride past someone in need, not after everything, not anymore." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "This ranch has always been about more than cattle and land. It's about family, and family isn't just blood, it's choice. It's showing up for each other day after day, no matter what." He reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "You're becoming exactly who I hoped you'd be," he said. "Someone who sees people who are hurting and stops. Someone who offers help without expecting anything in return. Someone who—" His voice cracked. "Someone who makes me proud to call her my daughter." Lena felt tears prick her eyes again. She had cried more in the past 2 years than in the entire decade before, but these tears were different. These tears were born of joy, not grief, of love, not loss. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me." Marcus smiled. "Thank yourself. You're the one who chose to stop. You're the one who chose to care." The days that followed were challenging. Molly didn't trust easily,
She flinched at loud noises and cowered away from sudden movements. She hoarded food in her room, hiding bread and cheese under her pillow like treasures that might be taken away at any moment. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice was small and hesitant, as if she expected to be punished for making a sound. Lena recognized all of it, every fear, every defense mechanism, every survival strategy. She had done the same things when she first arrived at the ranch. The same hiding, the same hoarding, the same desperate attempts to make herself small and invisible. So she gave Molly the same thing Marcus had given her: space. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she told the girl one morning, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunrise. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. You can just be. Be here. Be safe. Be whatever you need to be." Molly didn't respond, but something in her expression softened, just a little. The breakthrough came a week later. Lena was in the barn grooming Bella when Molly appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a long moment, watching Lena work, before finally speaking. "Can I help?" It was the first time she had offered anything, the first time she had reached out instead of pulling back. Lena felt her heart swell with something that felt like hope. "Of course." She handed Molly a brush. "Here, you can work on her mane. She likes it when you start at the top and work your way down." They groomed the horse together in silence, the rhythm of the work creating a kind of peace that words couldn't have achieved. And when they were finished, Molly looked up at Lena with something new in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finding me, for stopping." Lena knelt down so she was at eye level with the girl. "I didn't stop because I had to," she said. "I stopped because I wanted to, because you matter, because everyone matters, even when the world makes you feel like you don't." Molly's lip trembled. "The Hendersons said I was a burden, said I was just another mouth to feed." "The Hendersons were wrong." Lena's voice was fierce. "Dead wrong. You're not a burden. You're a person, a smart, brave person who survived something terrible and came out the other side. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to have you in their life." A tear slid down Molly's cheek, then another. And then she was crying, the way Lena had cried on her first night at the ranch, deep, shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. Lena held her, just held her, the way Marcus had held Lena, and let her cry until the tears ran out. When it was over, Molly pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." Lena smiled. "Tears are just feelings that need to come out. There's nothing to apologize for." "Is it true?" Molly asked. "What you said about me mattering. It's the truest thing I know." Something shifted in the girl's expression then, a light that hadn't been there before, small but steady. The beginning of belief. "Okay," Molly said. "Okay." It wasn't acceptance, not yet. It was something smaller, something more fragile, but it was a start. And starts, Lena knew, were everything. Summer stretched on, hot and golden and full of life. Molly began to emerge from her shell, slowly but surely. She started helping with the horses, then with the cattle, then with whatever work needed doing around the ranch. She was quick to learn and eager to please, though she still flinched sometimes when people moved too fast or spoke too loud. Rosa took her under her wing, teaching her to cook and sew and do all the things that would help her survive in a world that wasn't always kind. Tom and the ranch hands treated her with the same gruff affection they showed Lena, including her in their conversations and their jokes and their evening gatherings around the fire. And Marcus watched it all with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen his legacy take root. "You've given her something precious," he told Lena one evening as they sat on the porch watching Molly chase fireflies in the yard. "The same thing I gave you. A chance. I learned from the best." "No." He shook his head. "You learned from yourself. I just showed you what was possible. You're the one who made it real." Lena watched Molly catch a firefly in her cupped hands, her face illuminated by the soft green glow. The girl was laughing, actually laughing, a sound Lena had never heard from her before. "She's going to be okay," Lena said. "Yes." Marcus nodded. "She is. And so are you." The words settled into Lena's heart like seeds taking root. She was going to be okay.
After everything, after the abandonment and the fear and the years of believing she was nothing, she was finally, truly going to be okay. Because she had found something worth living for. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just existing, but belonging. She had a family now, a father, a home, and soon, maybe, a sister. She had everything she had ever wanted, and she was determined to protect it, no matter what came next. But even as she sat there in the peaceful summer evening, surrounded by everything she loved, some part of her knew that the peace wouldn't last forever. That Garrett was still out there, still nursing his grudges, still looking for a way to take what he believed was his. The fight wasn't over. It might never be truly over. But for now, for this moment, there was peace. There was joy. There was the sound of a child laughing and the warmth of family and the promise of a future that was still being written. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Because Lena Stone Hale had learned something that all the abandonment and all the cruelty and all the years of suffering had never managed to teach her. That happiness wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And she was building it now, here, on this ranch that had become her home, with the people who had become her family, in the place where she finally, truly belonged. The winter that followed was the harshest anyone could remember. Snow came early and stayed late, piling up against the fences until the posts disappeared entirely, transforming the valley into a white expanse that seemed to swallow the world whole. The temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the buckets before you could carry them from the well to the barn, and the wind howled through the mountains like something alive and hungry. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth. Lena woke each morning to the smell of Rose's cooking and the sound of Molly's footsteps padding down the hallway. She spent her days working alongside the ranch hands, keeping the cattle fed and the horses sheltered, and the fences from collapsing under the weight of the snow. She spent her evenings by the fire with Marcus and Molly, reading or talking or simply sitting together in the kind of comfortable silence that only family can share. It had been 3 years since Marcus found her on that forest trail. 3 years since she had been nothing, starving, abandoned, convinced that she was worthless. Now she was 17 years old, legally adopted, the heir to one of the largest ranches in the territory. And she had a sister. The adoption papers for Molly had been finalized in the fall, making her Molly Stone Hale. She was 9 now, still small for her age, but no longer fragile, no longer flinching at every sound or hoarding food under her pillow. She had bloomed under the ranch's care the same way Lena had, transforming from a terrified waif into a spirited, curious child who asked endless questions and laughed at Tom's terrible jokes and followed Lena around like a shadow. "She worships you," Rosa observed one afternoon, watching Molly help Lena with the dishes. "You know that, right?" Lena felt her cheeks warm. "She just wants to learn. She wants to be like you." Rosa smiled. "Can't say I blame her. You've become quite a woman, Lena Stone Hale." The words settled into Lena's heart like sunlight. She still wasn't used to compliments, still felt that old instinct to deflect or minimize whenever someone said something kind. But she was learning to accept them, learning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved them. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow inch by inch, revealing the green grass beneath like a promise being kept. The cattle were moved back to the high pastures, the fences were repaired, and the ranch stirred back to life after the long winter's sleep. It was during one of those early spring days, when the air was still crisp but the sun was warm on your face, that Marcus called Lena into his study. "Close the door," he said. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made Lena's stomach tighten. She did as he asked, settling into the chair across from his desk, with a sense of foreboding she couldn't quite explain. Marcus looked older than he had 3 years ago. The lines on his face had deepened, and his hair had gone from gray-streaked to almost entirely white. But his eyes were still sharp, still full of the quiet intelligence that had built this ranch from nothing. "I've been to see the doctor in town," he said without preamble. "Last week, while you were moving the cattle." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to know what I was dealing with before I worried you." He paused, and something flickered across his expression, something that looked like acceptance. "My heart, Lena. It's been giving me trouble for a while now,"
shortness of breath, chest pains, the usual. I thought it was just age, but the doctor says it's more than that. How much more? He can't say for certain. Could be years, could be months. Marcus met her eyes steadily. Could be tomorrow. The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that Marcus wouldn't live forever. He was in his late 60s now, and ranch work was hard on a body. But knowing something intellectually and facing it as reality were two very different things. There must be something we can do, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Medicine, rest, something. I'm doing what the doctor recommended. Resting more, working less. Marcus smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. But I wanted you to know the truth. No secrets between us. That's how family works. Lena felt tears burning in her eyes. She tried to blink them back, but they spilled over anyway, running down her cheeks in hot, silent streams. Don't, she said. Don't you dare leave me. Not after everything, not now. I'm not planning on going anywhere yet. Marcus reached across the desk and took her hand. But plans don't always work out the way we want them to. And I need to know that when my time comes, whenever that is, you'll be ready. Ready for what? To take over. To run this ranch. To protect everything we've built. His grip tightened. I've spent the last 3 years preparing you for this, Lena. Teaching you everything I know. And you've learned it all, better than I could have hoped. But now I need you to understand something. What? This ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's legacy. It's the people who work here and depend on us. It's Molly and Rosa and Tom and everyone else who calls this place home. He paused. And it's you. It's the life you've built here, the person you've become. When I'm gone, all of that will be in your hands. I can't do it without you. Yes, you can. His voice was fierce. You've already done harder things than running a ranch. You survived being abandoned. You survived the orphanage. You survived Martha Greer. You stood up to Garrett when you were just a child, and you didn't back down. He smiled. You're stronger than you know, Lena. You always have been. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that strength meant nothing without him, that she needed him, that she wasn't ready to face the world alone. But she looked into his eyes, those kind, steady eyes that had seen so much and asked so little, and she understood what he was really asking. He wasn't asking her to be ready. He was asking her to promise. Okay, she said, her voice cracking. Okay, I promise. Marcus nodded slowly, and something like peace settled over his features. That's my girl. The months that followed were bittersweet. Marcus scaled back his work, spending more time on the porch and less time in the saddle. But he didn't retreat from life entirely. He was there for meals, for conversations, for the quiet moments that made up the fabric of family. He watched Molly grow and laughed at Tom's jokes, and sat with Rosa in the kitchen while she cooked, telling stories about the old days when the ranch was young. And he watched Lena take on more and more responsibility, stepping into the role he had been preparing her for all along. She handled the spring cattle drive with calm authority, directing the ranch hands and managing the logistics with a competence that surprised everyone except Marcus. She negotiated with buyers and balanced the books and made the hard decisions that came with running a business. She was the one the hands came to with questions, the one the neighbors sought out for advice. She was becoming what Marcus had always known she could be, a leader. You're doing well, he told her one evening as they sat together watching the sun set over the mountains. Better than I did at your age. You built all this from nothing. I'm just maintaining what you created. Maintaining is harder than building. Building is all fire and ambition. Maintaining takes patience, wisdom, consistency. He turned to look at her. You have all of those things. And more. Lena didn't know what to say. So she just sat there, watching the colors shift across the sky, and tried to memorize every detail of the moment. The warmth of the air, the smell of grass and horses, the sound of Marcus breathing beside her. She knew these moments were numbered, and she wanted to hold on to each one for as long as she could. Summer came, hot and golden and full of life. Molly turned 10, and they threw her a party with cake and presents, and all the ranch hands singing happy birthday,
in voices that were more enthusiastic than musical. She blew out her candles and made a wish, and when Lena asked what she had wished for, she just smiled and said it was a secret. Wishes only come true if you keep them to yourself, she explained, with the solemn certainty of a child who had learned to believe in magic again. Garrett had been quiet for nearly 2 years now. No threats, no visits, no lawyers appearing with paperwork. Some said he had given up, moved on to easier targets. Others said he was biding his time, waiting for Marcus to die so he could make his move on the widow's ranch. Except there would be no widow. There would be Lena. And Lena was not someone who could be pushed around. She proved that in August when Garrett finally made his appearance. He came with a different approach this time. Not threats or intimidation, but an offer. A generous one, on paper. He wanted to buy the south section, the land that Lena had been given, the land his father had lost all those years ago. He was willing to pay above market value, he said. It was a fair deal. Everyone would benefit. Lena received him in the study, sitting behind Marcus's desk like she belonged there. Because she did. "Mr. Garrett," she said, her voice cool and professional, "thank you for coming all this way. I'm afraid you've wasted your time. You haven't even heard my offer." "I don't need to hear it. The south section isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Garrett's expression flickered. Annoyance, maybe, or grudging respect. "You're making a mistake. That land isn't worth dying over." "Who said anything about dying?" Lena stood, placing her hands flat on the desk. "This land has been in the Hale family for 3 generations. It's mine now, legally and rightfully, and I intend to keep it that way." "Things change. People change." Garrett's voice hardened. "The old man won't be around forever." "No, he won't." Lena felt her jaw tighten. "But I will. And so will my sister, and so will our children and their children after them. This ranch will still be standing long after you and I are both dust in the ground, and the Garrett family will never own a single acre of it." She came around the desk and walked to the door, pulling it open. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Tom will see you out." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not anger exactly, but something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. Acknowledgement of an opponent who is not going to back down. "You've got spine," he said finally. "I'll give you that. I've got more than spine. I've got family, I've got home, and I've got everything worth fighting for." She met his eyes without flinching. "What do you have, Mr. Garrett? Besides old grudges and land you can't possess?" He didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Lena watched him go, her heart pounding but her hands steady. When she turned around, Marcus was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He had heard everything. "Well done," he said quietly. "I learned from the best." Fall arrived with a blaze of color that took Lena's breath away. The mountains erupted into flames of red and gold, and the air turned crisp and clear, and the world felt like it was holding its breath before the long winter's sleep. Marcus grew weaker as the days shortened. He spent more time in bed, more time resting, more time just sitting and watching the land he loved transform around him. But he wasn't sad. He wasn't bitter. He was peaceful. "I've had a good life," he told Lena one evening as she sat beside his bed holding his hand. "Better than I deserved, probably. Catherine, this ranch, the family I built here." He squeezed her fingers. "You. Don't talk like you're saying goodbye." "I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying thank you." He smiled, and his eyes, those kind, steady eyes, were bright with something that might have been tears. "Thank you for coming into my life, Lena Stonehale. Thank you for letting me be your father. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going after I thought I had lost everything." Lena couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her eyes too blurred. "You saved me," Marcus continued. "I know you think I saved you, that I rescued you from that trail and gave you a home. But the truth is, you saved me just as much. You gave me purpose again, family again, hope again." "Papa." The word came out broken, barely audible. She hadn't called him that often. It still felt strange on her tongue, even after all this time. But right now, it was the only word that mattered. "I'm proud of you," he said. "More proud than I can say. You've become everything I hoped you would be, and more. And I know
that when I'm gone, you'll take care of this place. Take care of the people here. Take care of Molly. I will, I promise. I know you will. He closed his eyes. You're my daughter, and my daughters keep their promises. He died 3 weeks later, on a quiet November morning when the first snow of the year was just beginning to fall. Lena was with him when it happened. She had been sitting beside his bed all night, holding his hand, talking to him even though he was mostly asleep. She told him about the ranch, about the cattle, about all the small details of daily life that she knew he loved to hear. She told him about Molly's latest adventures, about Rosa's new recipe, about Tom's ongoing feud with a particularly stubborn fence post. And she told him that she loved him, over and over until she was sure the words had sunk in, had reached whatever part of him was still listening. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for everything. For stopping on that trail. For giving me a chance. For believing in me when no one else did. She felt his hand tighten around hers, just slightly, just for a moment. And then he was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later beneath the old oak tree where Catherine and their first daughter were buried. The whole valley came, ranchers and farmers and townspeople, people who had known Marcus for decades, and people who had only met him once. They came to pay their respects to a man who had built something from nothing, who had helped his neighbors when they needed it, who had lived his life with quiet dignity and fierce love. Lena stood at the head of the grave, Molly's hand in hers, and spoke the words she had been preparing for weeks. Marcus Hale was the best man I ever knew, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. He found me when I was lost. He took me in when I was broken. He gave me everything, home, family, purpose, love, and asked for nothing in return except that I become the person he believed I could be. She looked out at the crowd, at all the faces watching her with sympathy and respect. He taught me that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's showing up for each other day after day, no matter what. It's building something together and protecting it together and mourning together when it's gone. She looked down at the grave, at the simple wooden marker that bore his name. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will also carry him with me, in everything I do, everything I build, everything I become, because that's what he would have wanted, not tears, not mourning, but continuation, legacy, life. She squeezed Molly's hand. This ranch will go on. This family will go on. And Marcus Hale's memory will live in every acre, every fence post, every horse that runs through these pastures, because that's what he built. Not just land, not just cattle, but something that would last, something that would matter. She took a deep breath. Rest now, Papa. You've earned it. The days after the funeral were the hardest. Lena threw herself into work, trying to fill the empty hours with activity, trying to outrun the grief that threatened to swallow her whole. She rode the fence lines and managed the cattle and handled all the business of running a ranch. And she told herself that she was fine, that she was coping, that she was strong enough to carry on. But at night, when the house was quiet and Molly was asleep, she would sit in Marcus's study and cry until she had no tears left. Rosa found her there one evening, curled up in Marcus's chair with her face buried in her hands. "Oh, child," Rosa said, her voice soft with compassion. She came and knelt beside the chair, putting a weathered hand on Lena's arm. "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know. Even the strongest trees bend in the wind." "I miss him," Lena whispered. "I miss him so much." "Of course you do. He was your father. He loved you, and you loved him." Rosa paused. "But he's not really gone, Lena. He's in this house, in this land, in every single thing he taught you. You carry him with you everywhere you go. It's not the same. No, it's not." Rosa smiled sadly. "But it's something, and sometimes something is enough." She helped Lena up, guided her to bed, tucked her in like she was a child again. "Sleep now," she said. "Tomorrow is a new day, and new days bring new strength." Lena slept. And in her dreams, Marcus was there. Not dying, not sick, but young and strong and full of life. He was riding beside her through the valley, pointing out the mountains and the streams and the endless sweep of land that was their home. "You're going to be okay," he told her. "You're going to be more than okay. You're going to be everything." She woke with tears on her face and peace in her heart. Winter passed. Spring came. And slowly, gradually, life resumed its rhythm. Lena ran the ranch with the same quiet competence Marcus had shown, and the hands followed her without question. She made decisions that would have terrified her 3 years ago: which cattle to sell, which to keep, when to expand, and when to consolidate. She made mistakes sometimes, but she learned from them, just like Marcus had taught her. Molly grew taller, smarter, more confident with each passing month. She was learning to ride now, really ride, and she spent hours in the saddle exploring the land that would one day be hers to protect. "Tell me about when Papa found you," she asked one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. It was a story she had heard 100 times, but she never tired of it. So Lena told her about the forest trail, about the crumbs in her hand, about the man who had stopped when no one else would have, who had offered food and water and choice. "And then what happened?" Molly asked, even though she knew. "And then I came here," Lena said, "and everything changed. Because he chose you. Because we chose each other." Lena put her arm around her sister. "That's how family works. It's not about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to love someone every single day, no matter what." Molly was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You chose me too," she said finally. "Yes." Lena felt her heart swell. "I did. And I would choose you again 1,000 times over." Garrett returned in the fall when the leaves were just beginning to turn. But this time was different. He came alone, without lawyers or threats or demands. He rode up to the ranch house and asked to speak with Lena, and when she came out to meet him, she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. "Miss Hale," he said, tipping his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding." "That depends on why you're here." "To apologize." The word seemed to cost him something. For everything, the threats, the fire, the years of making your life difficult. It was wrong. All of it. Lena stared at him, not sure what to say. "My father spent his whole life consumed by grudges," Garrett continued. "He died bitter and angry, convinced that the world owed him something it refused to pay. And He shook his head. "I was becoming him. I could see it happening, and I couldn't stop it. The anger, the obsession, the need to possess things that were never mine to begin with. What changed? My daughter was born." Something softened in his expression. 6 months ago. And when I held her for the first time, I realized I don't want her to inherit what my father gave me. Hate, resentment, a legacy of destruction. He met Lena's eyes. "I want her to inherit something better, a name that stands for something other than cruelty." Lena was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was hearing. "I can't undo what's been done," Garrett said. "Can't bring back your barn or give you back the years of fear. But I can promise you, on my honor, on my daughter's future, that it ends here. The feud, the threats, all of it. And the South section, yours, legally, rightfully, forever." He almost smiled. "I won't pretend I don't still want it, but some things matter more than land, and I'd rather my daughter grow up knowing her father was a decent man than inherit a ranch built on someone else's suffering." Lena studied him, the lines on his face, the weariness in his eyes, the genuine regret that seemed to radiate from every part of him. She thought about Marcus, about all the lessons he had taught her, about forgiveness, about grace, about the courage it took to move forward instead of holding on to the past. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "And I hope you mean what you say. Because if you don't, if this is just another trick, you'll find that I'm not the scared little girl you met on this porch 3 years ago." "I can see that," Garrett nodded. "Your father raised you well." "Yes," Lena said. "He did." They shook hands, a formal gesture, but somehow meaningful. And then Garrett mounted his horse and rode away, and Lena watched him go with a feeling she couldn't quite name. Closure, maybe, or hope, or just the quiet satisfaction of seeing something broken finally begin to heal. 5 years later, the ranch had grown beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. Lena had expanded the cattle operation, added new pastures, built a second barn to replace the one that had burned all those years ago. She had hired more hands, established relationships with buyers across 3 territories, turned a prosperous ranch into a thriving empire. But the real growth wasn't in the land or the cattle or the money. It was in the family. Molly was 15 now, tall and strong and fierce in all the best ways. She had inherited Lena's determination and Marcus's wisdom, and she was already showing signs of becoming a formidable rancher in her own right. She spent her days in the saddle, learning everything Lena could teach her, preparing to carry on the legacy that had been entrusted to them both. Rosa was still there, older and slower, but no less essential. She had become the grandmother neither girl had ever had, dispensing wisdom and comfort and chocolate chip cookies in equal measure. Tom had been promoted to foreman, running the day-to-day operations with the same quiet competence he had shown for decades. The other hands, some old, some new, worked alongside him with loyalty and respect. And there were others now, too. Children who had shown up at the ranch the same way Lena and Molly had, abandoned, lost, in need of somewhere to belong. Lena had taken them in, one by one, giving them the same chance Marcus had given her. Because that was what the ranch was for. That was what it had always been for. Not just cattle and land, but family, legacy, home. It was a summer evening, golden and warm, when Lena finally understood the full weight of what Marcus had given her. She was standing at the gate that marked the boundary of the property, looking out over the valley she had come to know better than her own heartbeat. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the land stretched out before her like a promise being kept. Molly came to stand beside her, and together they watched the light fade. "Do you remember the day Papa found you?" Molly asked. "Every detail," Lena smiled. "I was standing on a trail, covered in dirt, holding a handful of crumbs that were supposed to last me 2 days. I thought I was going to die out there. And now look at you." Molly gestured at the ranch behind them, the houses, the barns, the fences stretching toward the horizon. "You built all this. We built it, all of us, together. But it started with you deciding to get on that horse and ride into the unknown." Lena thought about that day, about the fear she had felt, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. It had been different. Impossibly, wonderfully, miraculously different. "You know what I've learned?" she said softly. "In all these years through everything that's happened." "What?" "That being left behind isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning." She turned to look at her sister. "Every single person who abandoned me, my mother, my father, the orphanage, Martha Greer, they all thought they were throwing away garbage. Something worthless, something that didn't matter." Her voice grew stronger. "But they were wrong. They were all wrong. Because the thing about being thrown away is that it teaches you something. It teaches you that your worth doesn't come from other people. It comes from you. From what you choose to do with the life you've been given." She looked back at the valley, at the land that was hers, at the home she had built from nothing. "Marcus didn't save me," she said. "He gave me the chance to save myself. And that's what I'm trying to do for everyone who comes through these gates. Not rescue them, but show them that they're worth saving, that they matter, that they belong." Molly was quiet for a long moment. Then she slipped her hand into Lena's, the way she had done when she was small and scared and new to this world. "You're a good person, Lena Stonehale," she said. "The best person I know." "I had good teachers." "You had one teacher, and he's still here." Molly touched her heart. "Right here. Always." Lena felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't try to stop them. These weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of the profound, overwhelming joy of having found her place in the world. "Come on," she said, squeezing Molly's hand. "Rosa's making dinner, and you know how she gets if we're late." They turned and walked back toward the ranch house, toward the lights glowing in the windows and the smell of bread baking and the sound of laughter drifting through the open door. Toward home. Behind them, the sun finished its descent, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The valley fell into shadow, peaceful and quiet, the land resting after another day of being lived upon and loved. And at the gate, standing where Lena had stood just moments before, a figure appeared. It was a boy, maybe 12 years old, thin and dirty and alone. He was looking at the ranch house with an expression that Lena would have recognized instantly: hope and fear and desperate, terrible longing. The same expression she had worn all those years ago on a trail in the middle of nowhere. Molly saw him first. She stopped, her hand still in Lena's, and turned to look. "Lena," she said quietly. "Look." Lena looked. Lena, and something in her chest tightened, not with fear or worry, but with recognition, with purpose. "Stay here," she told Molly. "I'll be right back." She walked toward the gate, toward the boy who stood there watching her approach with wary eyes. She moved slowly, the way you move around a frightened animal, giving him time to run if he needed to. But he didn't run. He just stood there, trembling, waiting. "Hi there," Lena said, when she was close enough to speak without raising her voice. "My name is Lena. I live here." The boy didn't respond. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "We have food, warm beds, people who care." Still nothing. But something flickered in his eyes, a spark of something that might have been hope. "You can come with me if you want," Lena continued, "or you can stay out here. It's your choice." She held out her hand. "But I want you to know something. Whatever happened to you, wherever you came from, it doesn't define you. It doesn't determine your worth. You matter. You belong. And there's a place for you here, if you want it." The boy stared at her hand, stared at her face, stared at the ranch house behind her with its warm lights and welcoming windows, and then slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took it. Lena smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and stayed there. "Welcome home," she said, and together they walked toward the light. The ranch grew quieter as the night deepened, but it was never truly silent. There were always sounds: the lowing of cattle in the distance, the whisper of wind through the grass, the creak of old wood settling into its bones. And there were always people, coming and going, staying and leaving, finding themselves and finding each other. That was what Marcus had built. Not just a ranch, not just a business, but a refuge, a haven, a place where people who had been thrown away could discover that they were worth keeping. Lena stood on the porch that night, after the boy had been fed and bathed and put to bed, and she looked up at the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere out there, she knew, were other children just like she had been, abandoned, alone, convinced that they were nothing. And somewhere out there, she hoped, were people like Marcus, people who would stop, people who would offer food and water and choice, people who would change everything with a single act of kindness. She couldn't save everyone. She knew that. The world was too big, and there were too many children in need, and she was just one woman on one ranch in one small corner of a vast, indifferent world. But she could save some, one at a time, the way she had been saved. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could do: light one small candle against the darkness and hope that others would do the same. "Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet night, "I hope I'm making you proud." There was no answer. There never was. But somehow, in the warmth of the night and the peace of the valley and the knowledge of all the lives she had touched, she felt it anyway. Pride, love, approval. The things Marcus had given her, still giving, even now. She turned and went inside, closing the door behind her, and the ranch settled into sleep, safe and warm and full of dreams. In the morning, there would be work to do, cattle to tend, fences to mend, children to teach and guide and love. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt, but there would also be joy, laughter, the slow, steady accumulation of moments that made up a life well lived. Because that was what Lena Stone Hale had learned in all her years of being abandoned and found, of being broken and healed, of being nothing and becoming everything. Life wasn't about the bad things that happened to you. It was about what you did afterward. It was about choosing to get up when you fell down. It was about choosing to hope when hope seemed impossible. It was about choosing to love when love seemed dangerous. And it was about choosing to stop, to reach out your hand, to offer food and water and shelter when you saw someone standing alone on the trail, waiting for someone to care. Marcus Hale had made that choice all those years ago. And now Lena was making it too, over and over, for as long as she lived, Because that was what it meant to be someone who mattered, not waiting for the world to give you worth, but going out and creating it yourself. One choice at a time, one life at a time, one hand reaching out for another in the darkness, finding each other, holding on. The girl who had once been left on a trail to die was now a woman who opened her doors to the lost and the broken and the thrown away. And she would keep opening them, forever, no matter what. Because home wasn't a place you were born into. It was a place you built, a place you earned, a place you shared with the people who chose to love you and the people you chose to love in return. And Lena Stone Hale had the biggest, warmest, most beautiful home in the entire world. Not because of the land or the cattle or the money, but because of the family, the legacy, the love. The proof that even the most broken things could be made whole again. The proof that nobody was ever truly nothing. The story that had started with abandonment ended with belonging. The girl who had been left behind was now the one who stayed. And that made all the difference.